Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku. Back with another fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Met the Shadow Heroine of Class 1A. Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Reina considered her morning a drag as she woke at 5:59 a.m. She sat up, rubbed the sleep from her eyes, and watched the ceiling as the alarm by her bedside began to shrill at 6. Her body sagged and she sighed heavily. If she woke up before the alarm every day, she wondered, what was the point of setting it? The thought alone made her feel tired. Her mother, Nori, shouted from downstairs for Reina to turn the alarm off and come down. Reina groaned, threw her head back, and stared at the ceiling with a bored expression. Her hand moved to the alarm just as footsteps climbed the stairs. When the ringing stopped, the footsteps paused too. Reina let out a resigned breath and forced herself out of bed to wash up before her mother's next round of shouting. At the breakfast table, Reina sat sluggishly while her father read the newspaper and sipped his coffee. Her mother stood nearby with her hands on her hips, dressed in a gray blazer and matching pencil skirt, her ponytail tight and neat. The look in Nori's eyes made it clear she intended to quiz her daughter. Nori asked Reina what she had decided to do about her future and urged her to consider applying to the hero course. Reina cast a tired glance at her father, Akiro, who returned a helpless shrug that made it plain he would not intervene. Akiro was a well-known lawyer with the same weary eyes as his daughter and slightly mussed-dark hair. Reina admitted she had not decided yet and thought she had plenty of time with 10 months of middle school left, but her mother pressed on about the importance of ambition. Nori reminded Reina that she had a wonderful quirk and encouraged her to apply to UA and become a professional hero. Reina found the idea tedious and muttered that it sounded like a drag. Nori's frustration showed, and she reached out to tap Reina's head in exasperation. The motion missed unexpectedly, and Reina's face accidentally collided with her steaming bowl of soup. She flinched from the heat and shouted in surprise. Akiro reacted with a quick, almost comical splash of water to her face to quiet the scene. Nori wiped sweat from her brow and suggested they continue the conversation later, insisting Reina change or she would be late. Akiro folded his newspaper and told Reina to go wash her face before he finished getting ready to drive her to school. Reina left the table with the resigned sense that she knew how the morning would go. Her mother's own dreams reached back to her grandfather, who had been a hero. Nori had always been fascinated by heroes and had once tried to enter UA's hero course herself. She had not succeeded and ended up in general studies instead, where she later met Reina's father. Nori's encouragement for Reina to pursue hero work stemmed from those old dreams, and while it might seem like pressure from others, Reina felt she had no strong ambitions of her own beyond cloud watching. She appreciated her mother's intentions, even if she wished they were less troublesome. After washing up and donning her uniform, Reina stepped outside to find her father waiting in his black car. She climbed into the passenger seat, fastened her seatbelt, and the two of them drove in companionable silence. Her mother usually did the talking in the family. Akiro listened and provided quiet balance. During the drive, Reina asked why he had married someone so energetic and occasionally scary. Akiro considered the question and then explained that even someone as intense as Nori had moments that made him certain she was the one. Reina rolled her eyes inwardly at the prospect of gooey romance but accepted the answer. The car stopped in front of Reina's private middle school. Akiro pointed out a boy waiting nearby, and Reina, unimpressed, told him she did not have any friends and thought friends were a drag. The boy her father had noticed was Todoroki Shoto, the son of a famous hero. He was even more reserved than Reina, with two-toned hair and striking eyes, and most students assumed he spoke little. Akiro had once seen him return Reina's notebook and had taken that as a sign of friendship, even if Reina did not share the sentiment. Reina stepped out of the car and walked onto the school grounds, more interested in the clouds above than in the bustle of other students. She often spent class time dozing or watching the sky, content to float through her days without making grand plans. And that's what she did that morning as well. The second she got to her desk, she flopped her head down and sank into the peaceful slumber that always came on the hard desks of middle school. They were not comfortable, as one would expect. By the end of third PRD, A classmate handed her a test paper and woke her. The test paper bore a perfect 100 in bright red ink and a small handwritten note praising her work. Sleeping through lessons did not mean she never paid attention. She paid attention enough. The teachers often simplified the easiest questions in long, tedious ways, and she preferred to answer directly. Short answers that cut through the fluff were usually frowned on, but she had earned a pass. She had single-handedly raised the school's average by 10%. With grades like hers, Reina could not understand why her mother worried about her future. She could get into any top high school and later university if she bothered. Reina knew the only thing she was truly motivated about was sleeping. The rest of the school day was as mundane as it could be, except for Todoroki asking to compare test papers in the library to see what mistakes he had made. He had scored 94, the second highest. Reina rested her head on the table as she watched him analyze both papers, noting a subtle furrow in his brow. His build and athleticism made it easy to assume he was headed for the hero path like his father. Reina looked up and asked whether he planned to pursue the hero course. Todoroki blinked, giving her attention, and confirmed that he planned to do so. He then returned to his paper, circling his errors, and after a few quiet minutes he handed Reina her paper back and walked away. On the train ride home, her mother's words nagged at her, "Apply to UA and become a hero." U was the alma mater of her parents and some great heroes, a school like All Might's. Reina sighed when she found herself at the office of her mother's company. The nameplate read Takahashi Nori, CEO and founder. She opened the door and found her mother sitting in the middle of the room on a boss chair behind her desk, ending a phone call at the sight of her. "Daughter." Nori told her she would have to call back and reminded Reina that she was supposed to be at home. Reina told her mother to register her name for UA's entrance exam for the hero course and offered to try once, promising that if she did not get in then her mother would stop pestering her. Nori straightened and, overcome with excitement, declared that she accepted whatever Reina wanted. She rose, smiling with a young brightness, hugged her daughter tightly, and swung her around in a joyful, energetic embrace, exclaiming that her daughter would be a hero. Reina noted with mild surprise how strong her mother was. Time moved forward in the usual way. Reina watched cherry blossoms bloom outside her classroom window and felt the days blur. Their homeroom teacher announced that, with graduation approaching, they would review the high school students had applied to. Some students cheered at their own plans. The teacher then announced that 2 students were applying to UA, Todoroki Shoto and Takahashi Reina. Reina's gaze slid to Todoroki, and they exchanged a brief look. Classmates murmured in surprise and disbelief, commenting that they understood Todoroki's choice but were shocked about Reina applying to the prestigious hero school. Others guessed she might be applying for a different course, such as business or general studies. Reina sighed and dropped her head back on the desk to tell them she was applying to the hero course and that there was no need to guess for her. Their reactions ranged from skeptical to amused. Some students remembered her sleeping through gym class and wondered aloud if she could possibly pass the test or even wake up during a crisis. The teacher clapped to quiet them and praised Reina for finally showing ambition. At the entrance exam, the auditorium was filled with nervous energy. Present Mike took the stage and announced in his characteristically loud voice, rallying the crowd and getting the event underway. A green-haired boy nearby fawned excitedly like a devoted fan, and someone with glasses criticized the exam setup, muttering about an alleged miscount. Present Mike scolded the mutterer for being distracting and called for order before continuing to explain the event and send everyone off. When Reina reached the exam area, her enthusiasm waned. The simulated villain scenarios and point systems seemed like too much work now that she was here, but she knew she had to try at least once for her mother's sake. She looked up at the sky and tucked her hands into her pockets, noticing how blue the day seemed. A loud buzzer signaled the beginning of the exercise, and all the examinees sprinted toward the simulated city. Reina sighed and walked in with her hands in her pockets, scanning the area before activating her quirk. Shadows extended from her feet in quick, fluid motions and seized 3 training robots. The shadows lifted the machines into the air and slammed them down in a controlled, explosive display that left them disabled. Reina thought the machines were heavy and that this was a pain, but the move had the clean efficiency of practice technique. Reina wanted to go home and sleep. The thought made her yawn. Watching other students take down the training robots with quick, practiced movements, she knew she had to be just as swift. She melted into the shadows and disabled the robots from the dark. Her quirk, Umbrakinesis shadow manipulation, made that possible. She had been fortunate to inherit a strong ability. Reina told herself to get it over with. Nori paced in the living room and complained that she could not believe the delay. The Takahashis sat folding laundry while Akiro tried to soothe his wife, saying to stay calm because the letter would arrive soon. Nori half-jokingly said they should sue the school if the letter did not arrive by the next day. Reina rolled her eyes and volunteered to check the mail before any lawsuits were filed. At the mailbox, which was full of letters mostly addressed to her parents, Reina found the envelope she had been waiting for. She brought it inside and announced that UA had responded. Nori clapped her hands and told Reina not to be nervous, while Akiro encouraged his daughter calmly and then tore open the envelope. A small metal disc fell out along with the letter, and Akiro, remembering how it worked, placed the disc on the table and clicked it. A projection of All Might appeared and apologized for the wait, explaining there had been a mix-up in the system. The projection noted that acceptance and rejection notices were normally distributed a week after the exam and that Reina's performance had not been recorded properly because she had moved in and out of the shadows so quietly that the system intelligence had failed to register her. A clip played showing a dark shadow sweeping across the training field and emerging with Reina hunched and out of breath at the end. The projection commented on how quietly she had operated and then brought up the exam scoreboard. The projection announced that Reina had accumulated 32 villain points and 27 rescue points, for a total of 59 points, placing 9th in the entrance exam and earning her a spot in the hero course. Nori shrieked with delight and immediately began celebrating how proud she was, while Akiro wrapped an arm around Reina's shoulder and praised her. The projection explained that because the staff had noticed the error late, the students were officially enrolled, and reassured Reina that her potential and her strong written exam score made her an exception. All Might's projection encouraged her to hold her head high and ended with the school motto, Plus Ultra. Before fading, the projection made a humble request that Reina's father not take any drastic actions against the school. There was a brief silence before Akiro and Nori burst into laughter, replaying the projection's sheepish expression. Reina allowed herself a small, amused huff as her parents continued to celebrate. Reina did not want to wake up that morning. Most days felt the same, but this one mattered. It was her first day at UA. The alarm clock rang and Nori shouted for her to get up. Reina groaned, slapped the alarm off, and sat up slowly before heading to the bathroom. About 30 minutes later she came downstairs in the UA uniform. A white shirt, green skirt, red tie, and gray blazer. The table had been set with foods she would eat, favorites, as her mother liked to say. Reina did not have much of an appetite and often found eating tedious, but she sat and hummed a simple greeting. When her father acknowledged her, her mother fussed over her hair and straightened the uniform with maternal enthusiasm, telling small stories about the way Reina used to bring home stray cats. Reina reminded herself that she was placed in Class 1A, the top class, knowing that it would be a mix of talented and varied students. Nori suddenly called her name loudly, and Reina yelped, falling back off her chair onto the floor. Akiro asked if she was all right and finished his coffee with calm concern while Nori helped her up and scolded her gently for being clumsy. Reina groaned and said she should get going. Akiro offered to drive her, standing and putting on his coat, and Nori smoothed his tie before he adjusted her blazer in return, exchanging a brief, affectionate moment that made Reina roll her eyes. Before Reina left, her mother took her hand and placed a small, cylinder-shaped pocket-sized box into it. Akiro handed Reina a small pack of energy tablets and told her she might need them. Reina answered that she doubted UA would put her through heavy quirk training on the first day, but she trusted her mother's experience. Reina collapsed against the car door and stared at the sky, eyes flat with boredom. Akiro asked if she was excited. Reina said she was not. Akiro gave her a wry comment about honesty as they pulled up in front of UA's H-shaped building. Reina walked the halls searching for Class 1A and stopped at the large door marked with the class number. She slid it open and found students already seated, chatting in small groups. The seating chart on the board placed her name in the bottom left corner, an extra desk at the very back. She scanned the room and noted that, if her acceptance had not been delayed, she would have sat in front of Tokoyami, whom she assumed was the bird-like student. Instead, she took the seat one row behind him and immediately rested her head on the desk to sleep, ignoring the rest of the classroom. Her brief piece ended when a voice from across the room scolded her to sit properly, insisting that UA students should not be slouched so early in the morning. Reina peered up to see the same glasses-wearing boy who had interrupted the exam explanation. He looked very uptight and officious. He tooted impatiently and demanded compliance. Reina yawned and sat up slowly, remarking that he must be popular at parties. She then pointed ahead to the boy with spiky blonde hair and suggested that the glasses-wearing boy should worry about him instead. The glasses-wearing boy turned to the blonde, who had his feet up on the desk, and dashed forward without hesitation. On Reina's right she noticed a student with mismatched hair. She had expected him to be there and had seen the seating arrangement before sitting down. The glasses-wearing student ordered the blonde to take his feet off the table, and the blonde replied with a sharp retort, mocking the other boy's rigidity and asking if his old school had made him that way. The glasses-wearing student introduced himself as Ida Tenya, and their bickering escalated. The blonde, Bakugo, called Ida an extra and threatened to blast him, making the classroom more raucous than Reina remembered from middle school. She sighed inwardly at the noise and feared she would not be able to nap. Reina glanced toward the door and noticed a frail, enthusiastic boy who clearly admired the heroes. She decided his presence was not her concern. She took out her phone and sent a message to her family group chat asking to be picked up because she was ready to give up. Her father replied with a curt refusal and a thumbs down, while her mother sent a cheerful encouragement with a heart emoji. Reina's eye twitched as she exhaled. A rough voice at the front of the class told anyone who was only there to make friends to leave. The students watched as a disheveled man emerged from a yellow sleeping bag. He looked abrupt and unembellished. He announced that it had taken 8 seconds for them to quiet down and that time was precious, then introduced himself as Aizawa Shota, their homeroom teacher. Aizawa explained that people were often prevented from realizing the true potential of their quirks and then produced a gym uniform from his bag, instructing everyone to put it on and go out to the field. When the class protested about missing the entrance ceremony and orientation, Aizawa steered the lesson toward a quirk assessment test. He reminded them that understanding their limits was essential. He cited Bakugo's practical exam performance and asked what his softball throw record had been in junior high. Bakugo responded that it had been 67 meters. Aizawa then told him to try repeating the throw using his quirk, and Bakugo let out a fierce cry as fiery energy propelled the ball hundreds of meters away. Aizawa held up a device that displayed a reading of 705.2 meters and emphasized that knowing their limits was the first rational step toward becoming heroes. The students reacted with excitement at the experiments, but Aizawa's expression grew serious. He warned them that if anyone came last in all 8 tests they would be expelled. The class erupted in shock at the severity of the rule. Reina considered that her being the extra student 21 pupils where there should have been 20 might be the cause of this situation, but she reasoned that UA would not have made special arrangements to admit her only to expel someone later. She concluded that this seemed to be the teacher's own method of selection, and that he wielded considerable authority over the hero course. She found the whole thing tiresome and suspected it was a psychological test as much as a physical one. For the first test, Reina found herself in a trio with a boy whose elbows shot out tape that he used to swing, and another student with bright red hair who ran normally. At the whistle, the elbowed boy used his tape to swing toward a distant pole, the red-haired student sprinted, and Reina slid smoothly on her own shadow to propel herself forward. A timing device registered her time as 5.01 seconds, placing her first, the elbowed student second, and the red-haired student third. The following tests measured grip strength, standing long jump, and repeated side steps. Reina performed decently across these drills, registering a grip strength of 72 kilograms and demonstrating solid results in the jumps and agility exercises. The ball throw test drew particular attention. A girl with short brown hair threw and achieved an infinite reading thanks to a gravity-related quirk, which drew admiring murmurs. Reina stepped into the throwing ring and handled the ball in her hand as she prepared for her attempt. She pulled her arm back and sent the ball as far as she could, then summoned 2 black shadow wisps from her feet to propel it forward. Aizawa lifted the device to show a distance of 286.7 meters. Reina stepped back with her classmates as Midoriya walked into the throwing ring. Ida observed that it did not look good for Midoriya if he continued the way he had been. Bakugo scoffed and dismissed Midoriya as quirkless. Ida, surprised, reminded everyone of what Midoriya had done in the practical exam. Reina felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see a girl slightly taller than her introduce herself as Momo Yaoyorozu and offer her hand. Reina returned the handshake and introduced herself as Reina Takahashi. Yaoyorozu explained that they sat near each other, so she had come to make a proper introduction. Aizawa then revealed that he had erased Midoriya's quirk. Reina watched his scarf unravel and the air around his hair shift as Midoriya was pulled closer. Midoriya mentioned the pro-hero eraser head and his ability to erase quirks. Ida noted that Midoriya appeared to have received some advice. Bakugo assumed the advice had been a threat of expulsion. Midoriya launched the ball with a sudden surge of force. Wind picked up and the throw soared before landing. Aizawa's device registered a score of 705. Midoriya insisted that he could still move, clenching his fist despite a bruised finger. Reina thought it was unusual that Midoriya's quirk seemed to cause him pain. Most bodies adjusted to their quirks, but some exceptions existed. Bakugo charged toward Midoriya, demanding to know what was happening. Suddenly, Bakugo froze, his body relaxing as if something had been taken out of him. He then assumed a casual pose, putting his arms behind his head and leaning on one foot, exactly the pose Reina herself struck. Reina sat down on the ground, crossed her legs, and propped her face on her hand. Bakugo copied her movements precisely as if puppet. Onlookers pointed out that a shadow was connecting the two, and several students realized that Reina was controlling Bakugo's movements with her shadow. Aizawa stepped in and instructed Reina to stop, prompting her to release the shadow control. Reina, still sitting on the ground, looked up and watched clouds pass by while Aizawa continued to reprimand the class. Aizawa then moved on to announce the test results. He pressed a button and a scoreboard projected, showing Reina in 10th place. Momo Yaoyorozu held 1st place and Todoroki Shoto held 2nd. Midoriya was last. Aizawa admitted that his earlier threat to expel someone had been a lie, explaining that it was a calculated deception meant to bring out the best in them. Several students reacted with disbelief. Yaoyorozu commented that the lie had been easy to deduce. Reina could not fully accept that it had all been an exercise in motivation. If it were only a lie, why stage such an elaborate test? Still, Aizawa must have seen something worth testing. Midoriya, sweating and nervous, thanked Reina for helping him earlier. Reina gave a simple nod and said she was glad to help. As the class dismissed, Reina pulled out her phone and sent a message to the family group chat asking to be picked up and mentioning that their teacher was scary. Her mother replied that she hoped it would scare the laziness out of Reina, adding a heart, and her father sent a thumbs up. The rest of the day continued with ordinary classes. Reina was scolded by Ida for falling asleep in class. At the end of the day she headed for the main gates, checking her pockets for her IC card, when Achiko Uraraka called out cheerfully and invited her to walk to the station together. Reina agreed and was soon joined by Ida and Midoriya. Uraraka introduced herself and confirmed everyone's names as they walked. Reina, distracted by an interesting cloud, paid little attention until Uraraka called her name again. The four of them chatted on the way to the train station. Reina only spoke when spoken to and noticed that Ida was earnest and conscientious. Before they parted, Uraraka exchanged contact information with Reina. The brief socializing that afternoon amounted to more interaction than Reina had experienced in a month. The UA Hero course curriculum required regular academic classes in the morning, which Reina often slept through and for which Ida frequently admonished her. Lunch took place in the main cafeteria, where reasonably priced, high-quality food was served. Reina spent lunch with Uraraka, Ida, and Midoriya. Cook Hero Lunch Rush had prepared the meal, and Midoriya reacted with visible excitement. Today they were going to have their first heroics class. All Might announced that he was coming through the door like a normal person, which contradicted him because his entrance was anything but ordinary. The class erupted in admiration, with several students noting that it was All Might, that he had become their teacher, and that his costume looked like something from the Silver Age. All Might moved to the podium and explained that he would be teaching hero basic training, a subject focused on learning the fundamentals of being a hero and taking the most units in the curriculum. He held up a card labeled Battle and said that the session would be combat training. Reina thought ruefully that this was just great. All Might pointed to a row of numbered suitcases in the corner that held their hero costumes. He instructed everyone to change and then gather in ground beta, and the class responded with affirmative noise. Reina had not designed her own costume. She had left that job to her mother. When she saw it for the first time, she found it practical, an all-black bodysuit with many pockets, breathable material that allowed free movement, and a utility belt where she decided to keep a box of energy tablets. Without lingering in the girls' dressing room, she headed for ground beta, hoping she might catch a quick nap. She did not. They all stepped out 5 minutes later. From ground beta, Reina took in the variety of costumes around her. Some were meticulously planned, some were fashionable, and Todoroki's stood out in its own way. She deliberately looked away from him and resolved not to think about him or Midoriya right then. All Might praised the class for their appearance and then addressed them in his usual exuberant manner as he prepared to begin. All Might explained that for the exercise the class would be split into heroes and villains to fight 2-on-2 indoor matches. Tsuyu asked whether they would be doing this without basic training. All Might replied that the point was to learn those basics through real combat, and this time there would be no practice robots to fight. Students asked questions about how wins and losses would be determined, whether fighting would be allowed, what punishments would apply, and how teams would be split. Ida inquired about scoring. Bakugo asked bluntly whether they could simply beat their opponents. Other students voiced concerns about team size. All Might consulted his notes and outlined the rules and procedures. Yaoyorozu raised a hand to point out that a class of 21 would leave someone out. Reina also volunteered to be left out, which drew surprised reactions from their classmates. All Might had already planned for this. One team would be a trio, and since young Takahashi had volunteered, she would join that team. Teams and opponents would be determined by drawing lots. Reina sighed and hoped she might just watch, but she ended up on Team F with 2 boys. One was large and muscular, clearly a strength-type quirk user, the other appeared gentle and quiet. That would have to be enough. The first match to begin paired Midoriya and Uraraka against Ida and Bakugo. The match was intense, and the clash between Midoriya and Bakugo tore a sizable breach through the training facility in the heat of the confrontation. Afterwards, the instructors reviewed the match and declared Ida the MVP for his precise control and leadership, a choice that filled him with pride. Yaoyorozu provided a thoughtful analysis of the match, explaining why Ida had been most effective and where the others had erred. Todoroki's match followed. He used his ice and fire abilities to immobilize the area and won quickly. Then it was Reina's turn with Sato and Koda. Sato's quirk enhanced his strength when he consumed sweets, and Koda could communicate with animals, which was of limited use inside the building. They were assigned to play villains against a boy who styled himself as French and a pink-haired girl. Sato asked about a plan. Reina stretched and then sat cross-legged, deciding that doing nothing would be their strategy. She reasoned that their opponents did not appear very tactical and would likely charge head-on, so Sato and Koda should focus on guarding the objective. Reina moved out of the way to let them take position and used her quirk to walk on the wall, then hung upside down from the ceiling to observe the approach. As she expected, their opponents walked toward the objective in an obvious manner. The pink-haired girl used a corrosive sliding technique that made the floor slick, which could be dangerous. Reina dropped to the floor to shift the opponent's attention. The self-styled French boy fired a concentrated beam that she easily evaded. The corrosive user lunged at her. Reina sidestepped, redirected the momentum with a precise kick, and then used a skillful maneuver to link the opponent's movements to their own shadows. The corrosive girl began to mirror Reina's actions and, confused, ended up striking her teammate instead of her targets. From the monitoring room, classmates watched in awe and noted that Reina had used a move similar to one she had deployed earlier. Reina immobilized both opponents with time to spare. After finishing her match, Reina quietly dozed through the remainder of the session. When the exercise concluded, All Might commended the class for their effort and noted that there had been no major injuries apart from the earlier incidents. He praised their seriousness and effectiveness for a first training exercise. He then hurried away as if he had somewhere urgent to be. Yaoyorozu approached Reina with a smile and praised her performance. She also mentioned that one of their classmates had been behaving inappropriately during the exercise. Yaoyorozu had been paired with a short purple-haired boy who had acted inappropriately with persistent staring, and she sighed that his behavior was highly unbecoming. One student decided she would report it to teacher Aizawa soon, and another agreed that it was a good call. Uraraka approached them, followed by the frog-like girl who bounced as she walked. Uraraka greeted everyone and praised their performance. Tsu Azui introduced herself and added a small croak, asking them to call her Tsu. Mina Ishido insisted they not be left out and introduced herself, teasing that Takahashi had totally destroyed her. Reina blinked and said that it had not been her intention. Kyukajiru, the girl with headphone jack earlobes, introduced herself next, and a pair of gloves flapped as Toru Hagakure announced her name. Reina watched the girls converse easily, complimenting hero costumes and performance, and soon they were exchanging contact information and creating a group chat in the dressing room. Making friends with the girls seemed surprisingly easy to her. By evening, Midoriya returned from the nurse's office and was bombarded with questions from classmates. Reina decided to sneak in a nap before she had to take the train home. She could have called her mother's company for a driver, but her mother preferred she use public transit like other students, so she rode the train. It was a drag. Later, Uraraka leaned her forehead against the classroom window and exclaimed about a battle between two boys, clearly referring to the only two students absent that day, the childhood rival pair. Reina did not like mornings because of the early wake-ups, and the press at UA's entrance made the start of the day worse. Reporters had crowded the gates to stop Hero Corps students for interviews after the news that All Might would be teaching spread. Several reporters swarmed Reina with questions at once, and she complained that their behavior violated UA rules. She pointed out that preventing students from entering school, broadcasting training details, and recording minors without consent were all unacceptable. The media grew uneasy as they realized she was right. Teacher Aizawa arrived and shooed the press away, instructing Reina Takahashi to get to class. She nodded and made her way inside. In homeroom, Aizawa addressed the previous day's training. He told Bakugo that his talent did not excuse childish behavior, and he warned Midoriya about repeatedly injuring himself while trying to compensate for control issues with his quirk. Midoriya affirmed he understood. Then Aizawa announced that they would decide on a class representative, prompting a burst of volunteers. Reina laid her head on the desk, planning to nap while the selection took place. Ida proposed a democratic election, arguing that leadership required trust and could not be chosen lightly. Aizawa, slipping into his sleeping bag on the floor, told them to proceed. The election results were written on the board. Midoriya had 3 votes and Yaoyorozu had 2. Reina was surprised to see that someone had voted for her and raised an eyebrow. The class reacted with a mix of teasing and surprise. At lunch, Reina sat beside Uraraka with Midoriya and Ida. She quietly ate chicken teriyaki with rice while the others discussed the responsibilities of the class representative. Midoriya worried he was not qualified, and Ida reassured him, explaining that he had judged Midoriya suitable. When Uraraka asked if Ida had wanted the position himself, Ida explained that wanting a role and being suitable for it were different things. He added that he had tried to change how he spoke to avoid assumptions about his background, and then explained that he came from a family of heroes and was the second son. Reina asked about his older brother, and Ida nodded in acknowledgement. The cafeteria alarm suddenly sounded with a security announcement reporting a level 3 breach. An upperclassman answered Ida that this meant an unauthorized person was on school grounds, and then students began to panic and evacuate. In the scramble, Reina was pulled into the crowd and jostled like a rag doll as people shoved and hurried out. She caught sight of Ida, Midoriya, and Uraraka drifting away from her through the mass of students. She was shoved against a wall and found a taller boy pressed beside her, likely an upperclassman. Reina sighed as she tried to look out the window for any news. She did not expect the boy pressed against her to start trembling and murmuring that he wanted to go home. Reina sighed again, wrapped an arm around the boy's waist to steady him, and used her quirk to send a shadow whip that looped around a pillar near the ceiling. She pulled on it and hauled them both up onto a narrow ledge. The boy yelped. She crouched and guided him to sit so he would be supported on the ledge. Reina noted silently that he felt heavy. Reina told him to calm down because he looked like he might panic. She studied him more closely and realized he had dark blue hair and pointed ears. The boy pleaded for her to stop staring, his voice trembling, and Reina averted her eyes. A loud voice then boomed through the exit area. Ida stood above the doorway, positioned like the figure in an emergency exit sign. Ida announced that everything was fine and that the commotion was only the press, and his words visibly released a huge sigh of relief from the crowd. Reina muttered that the situation was settled, then lifted the elf-eared boy in a careful, over-the-shoulder carry and told him to hold on tight before jumping off the ledge and setting him down on his feet. Before he could respond, Reina turned and walked back toward her classmates. When she returned to class, a few changes had taken place. Midoriya stepped down from his leadership position and handed it to Ida, explaining that Ida was better suited for the role. Reina agreed with that decision. Around 12:50 p.m., Aizawa informed Class 1A that they had a special hero training session that day with 3 instructors. The boy with tape dispersers on his elbows, the same boy Reina had raced on the first day, raised his hand and asked what they would be doing. Aizawa held up a card that read Rescue and explained that the session would focus on disasters, shipwrecks, and everything in between. It would be rescue training. Aizawa then stopped the students from chatting and told them they could choose whether to wear their costumes this time, since some costumes limited abilities. The training would take place off campus and they would be taking a bus. He dismissed them to get ready. Reina walked toward the bus in her hero costume, blending in with the other girls who had chosen to wear theirs. Uraraka noticed Midoriya and asked why he was in PE clothes. Midoriya explained that his costume had been ripped during combat training and that he was waiting for the support company to repair it. Ida stood by the bus and blew his whistle to organize everyone. He instructed the students to line up according to their ID numbers and moved his hands in precise gestures to enforce order. He created a system for entering the bus, only to realize that the interior layout made it impractical. Ida expressed frustration at the mismatch. On the bus, Reina found herself seated next to a former middle school classmate. Neither had spoken since UA began. Reina thought it was better that way. There was no need for awkward socializing. Tsuyu called out to Midoriya and told him to call her Tsuyu. Midoriya blushed and fumbled a response. Someone observed that Midoriya's quirk resembled All Might's in appearance, but Kirishima objected that the similarities were only cosmetic because All Might did not get hurt when using his power. The conversation shifted to which quirks were flashy and strong. Tumultuous banter about popular classmates and personalities followed, and Bakugo erupted in outrage, leaping to his feet in typical fashion. The students traded barbs until Reina tuned them out and watched the clouds outside. Aizawa announced their arrival and the students disembarked. They were greeted by the space hero 13, who had been waiting to lead them inside a facility she called the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ. Midoriya and Uraraka reacted with obvious admiration as 13 gave them a short speech about using quirks to help others. 13 urged the students to remember that their powers were meant to assist people. As Aizawa was about to explain the first exercise, the lights in the simulation joint flickered and a fountain flared. A dark, swirling mass appeared near the fountain and began to distort the environment as it spread. Reina watched as a mist with 2 neon yellow eyes advanced across the courtyard in an eerie, unnatural way. Aizawa told the class to gather together and not move, and he ordered 13 to protect the students. Kirishima wondered aloud if this was already part of the exercise. Midoriya tried to step forward for a better look, but Aizawa stopped him and warned that those were villains. Yaoyorozu inquired about the facility's trespasser sensors, and 13 confirmed they had them, though she indicated there were complications. Reina crouched to get a clearer view of the unfolding scene. A man with light blue hair and multiple hands around his body walked out with several others. Reina questioned whether this was another one of Yue's mind games, but she fell silent when she noticed the teacher's guarded, uneasy body language. Aizawa responded that it was not a joke. Todoroki suggested that the intruders might have appeared only in this area or around the school, and noted that unresponsive sensors implied an enemy with a quirk that could interfere with detection. He pointed out that the isolated training area separated from the main campus during class time made the attack look planned and deliberate, not foolish. Aizawa ordered 13 to begin the evacuation and told Kaminari to try contacting the school using his quirk. Midoriya stepped forward worried about Aizawa fighting alone against so many. Aizawa told Midoriya that a hero could not rely on a single trick and entrusted the evacuation to 13 before leaping into the group of villains. Reina watched as Aizawa immediately incapacitated 3 attackers at once with precise movements of his scarf. Yaoyorozu pulled Reina toward the rest of the class to continue the evacuation, but a swirling purple mist formed by the fountain and blocked their path. The mist rose over them, its glowing eyes staring down the students. The mist announced that they were the League of Villains and that they had come to UA High School with the goal of ending All Might's presence as the symbol of peace. The speaker added that he had expected All Might to be here and that this was the role he intended to play. Before 13 could act, Bakugo and Kirishima charged into the mist, Bakugo producing an explosion. As the smoke cleared, the villain remained unharmed and even commented on the boys' quirks. 13 warned them to move away, but the mist declared its intent to scatter and defeat them. The purple mist engulfed the class. Ida cried out with his engines sounding, and Reina felt the mist swallow her. Reina found herself transported to another part of the training area, landing in a crouch below the mountain simulation in the plaza. She stood with her hands in her pockets, thinking through the situation. The attackers had broken into the school with a specific purpose, and the mis-expectation of All Might suggested they knew the training module. Reina wondered if a student had accidentally revealed details in an interview that morning, but dismissed the idea when she remembered they had not been aware of this activity until Aizawa announced it. The media commotion might have been a diversion to cover the break-in. A voice alerted the villains to Reina's presence, and multiple attackers surrounded her. Reina assessed them, all short-range quirks focused on close combat. She sighed, admitted to herself that she was not thrilled about fighting, and prepared to act. As the villains charged, Reina performed a backflip and a split kick that struck 2 attackers and sent them down. A large, burly man with a jagged smile swung a massive club at her, but Reina stepped aside to dodge the blow. Her shadow extended to bind his ankles and trip him forward. He hit the ground, and before he could recover, Reina moved fluidly to immobilize him by controlling his arm and keeping his legs restrained. She used a precise, non-graphic strike to render him unconscious and left him secured on the ground. When a woman with predatory eyes produced a knife and lunged, Reina's shadow grabbed the weapon-bearing wrist and yanked the knife free. She secured the attacker with a controlled throw and a follow-through that pinned her to the ground. Reina administered a quick, focused strike that knocked the woman unconscious without gratuitous detail. A small, wiry attacker unloaded rapid punches at Reina, but she stepped back to avoid them, seized his wrist, and used his momentum to throw him off balance. She struck decisively to bring him down, then allowed her shadow to restrain his legs until he ceased struggling. Reina noted to herself that the villains seemed less skilled than expected. If she could handle them, they must lack significant power. She focused on the next threat as the chaotic defense of the training area continued. Reina used her shadow to hook the ankles of the other villains and dangle them before slamming them into nearby boulders at the base of the mountain. She wondered how such a team could hope to destroy the symbol of peace, the country's strongest hero for decades. She linked her shadow to a larger man and forced him to lash out at his comrades. She considered the possibilities, a machine modeled after All Might, but that seemed too easy to break. Machines would not match him. Maybe a bioweapon bullets that weakened quirks, something her father had mentioned circulating on the black market, perhaps a stronger version. She landed with folded knees, spread her shadow in a circle, and snapped it into a whip to subdue the remaining villains. Still, she thought, a bullet could not stop someone who once threw an entire building with one hand. She knocked a few of them unconscious and walked toward the least foolish-looking enemy, demanding to know how they planned to kill All Might. Midoriya turned to Bakugo, who sat on the floor beside them, and he and Kirishima reacted with surprised relief at Bakugo's recovery. Bakugo denied having dodged the attack and said he had not seen anything. Kirishima questioned how it had happened as Todoroki looked toward the clearing haze. All Might stood there breathing heavily and scolded the students about holding back. The light blue-haired villain explained that the attack had been to rescue his comrades. The villain then began to monologue about his ideals. Todoroki started to point out the odds, but All Might cut him off and ordered them to run. Todoroki took a stance and remarked that things could have been worse if he had done nothing earlier. All Might thanked him and told everyone to watch as a pro gave everything he had. A purple Nomu charged from behind All Might, but no direct blow landed. All Might observed that they still needed help and turned to find Reina standing a few feet away with her hands behind her head. He noticed the Nomu mirroring her pose and then realized their shadows were connected. He called out to young Takahashi. Reina thought she had arrived in time and that the energy tablets had worked faster than expected. Her eyes flicked toward Azui and their classmate carrying their injured sensei, and she paused briefly. She then dropped her hands and moved forward, drawing the Nomu along with her. Reaching All Might's side, she feinted an attack in the air and made the Nomu strike the blue-haired villain instead. The mist user shouted in protest at the attack on Shigaraki and questioned how Reina was controlling the Nomu. Reina continued her relentless maneuvers, using the Nomu as if it were a puppet. Midoriya noted that Takahashi was controlling the Nomu with her shadow and called it impressive. That praise ended when the mist user used his warp gate to disable the Nomu's arms, breaking the connection Reina had been exploiting. Reina jumped back, eyes narrowing, noting how swiftly the creature regenerated. All Might warned young Takahashi when the Nomu aimed at her, its fist coming dangerously close. Midoriya cried out in alarm as dust rose. When the dust settled, Reina stood with her hands in her pockets on the Nomu's extended arm, which had become pinned against a boulder behind her, looking down at the creature with disinterest. She muttered that it was a drag to have it stay in one place. The Nomu swung again, but Reina leaped clear before it connected. The Nomu spun and aimed once more, but Reina dropped to the ground and submerged into its shadow. Midoriya, bewildered, tried to spot her, and then Reina emerged from the Nomu's shadow and stood. She complained that shadow traveling was tedious. All Might thanked Reina for the breather and told her she had done enough. Reina stared at him for a moment, then at the Nomu, and asked if he had the situation under control. All Might affirmed that he did. Reina then collapsed onto the ground on her back, putting a hand behind her head to rest, and announced she was going to sleep. Midoriya reacted with worry and called after her, but Reina paid him no mind. Kurogiri raised an eyebrow and sent a warp gate beneath her head, but before she could fall, a shadow shot into the opening, wrapped around Kurogiri's neck, and brought him down. Reina sat up with her hands intertwined and said she had him. Bakugo and Kirishima sprang into action in front of her, but Kurogiri severed the warp gate above her, freeing himself from her hold. Reina grimaced and turned her bored gaze to Shigaraki. She mocked him and asked how many people had been killed to create the Nomu. All Might and Shigaraki both stiffened at the question. Reina explained that the Nomu had once been a person, or perhaps many people given the number of quirks it contained, and that twisted scientists had modified bodies to hold multiple quirks, probably through quirk trafficking and breeding. The villain's plan was explained as taking one strong body with a strength-type quirk and then adding whatever else was needed to make it carry out their orders. Kurogiri expressed amazement that so much had been conveyed in just minutes and remarked that UA students were something else. All Might demanded confirmation, glaring at the villains as he questioned whether they had been experimenting with not just one life but multiple lives. Reina watched All Might unleash his full fury on the Nomu, each punch sending gusts that pushed her back. She used her quirk to steady herself. All Might shouted his rallying cry and drove the Nomu away with overwhelming force. Kirishima murmured that the hero's brute strength was insane as the Nomu was sent soaring into the sky. Bakugo observed the incredible power and wondered if the strike had been delivered so fast the creature could not recover. Reina found herself equally amazed. This was the world of professional heroes. Kirishima told Midoriya that they should get out of there. Reina turned to leave, but her legs suddenly went weak. Before she could fall, an arm reached out and caught her around the midriff. When she looked up, she met a pair of calm, mismatched eyes. He helped her stand and let her lean on him while she dug into her pocket for energy tablets. Reina realized she had used her quirk more than ever today and had drained most of her stamina. She took 3 tablets at once and waited for them to take effect. Gunshots sounded, and she looked up to see UA staff gathering at the entrance. Ida announced his return as the class representative, with a number of pro heroes standing behind him. Todoroki noted that the presence of so many pros suggested the attack had not targeted the entire school. Reina did not respond and instead began walking toward the stadium entrance, the tablets beginning to steady her. The students were later questioned by authorities once everyone had been checked and accounted for. Midoriya was the notable exception, having sustained injuries to both arms and legs due to the strain of his quirk. Reina sat in the dressing room with her things packed, thinking. The creature they had faced seemed engineered, and logically, creating such a thing would require a quirk capable of transferring or combining quirks. Shigaraki's behavior did not fit the role of mastermind for such a well-planned ambush. He looked more like a figurehead. Kurogiri appeared more like a caretaker than an organizer. Someone else had to be pulling strings behind them. If the pros did not locate them, these villains would be an even greater problem in the future. Infiltration, ambushes, mutants, quirks manipulated by scientists. Shigaraki clearly had powerful backers. The headache of the whole affair lingered as Reina left the school and found her father waiting by the car, holding the door open for her. During the drive he asked if villains had attacked her class. She nodded. He whistled low and asked if she had been hurt. She said no. He asked if she had slept through it. She responded that she wished she had. When she admitted she might have done some fighting, he praised her with a grin, reclined her seat, and draped his coat over her. He told her to sleep so she would have energy to face her mother's questions. Later that evening she sat on the roof, staring at the stars. The school had announced it would be closed the next day to allow students time to process the incident. Her father joined her and asked if she was cold. She said she was fine. He handed her a can of strawberry milk from his pocket and shared one with her. They sat in comfortable silence until he asked if something was bothering her. She admitted it was mainly the incident and the uncertainty about what had happened. He reassured her that dangerous events were part of being in the hero course and told her to get some rest. When the students returned to class, conversations about the USJ incident buzzed through the room. Yaoyorozu spoke to Reina and commented that she had heard Reina and the boy between their seats had fought the Nomu, calling it impressive. Reina downplayed it, noting that All Might had handled most of the work. Ida announced that morning homeroom was about to start and told everyone to take their seats. A student protested that they were already seated, and Ida pointed out that someone still was not. Reina reacted to Ida's sudden expression of dismay. Ishido asked Tsuyu who would teach homeroom that day. Tsuyu replied that Aizawa was still recovering from his injuries. The door opened and Aizawa entered, his body heavily bandaged. The class reacted loudly to his return. Ida asked if Aizawa was all right, and Uraraka expressed concern. Aizawa said that his personal condition was not the priority and warned that the fight was not over. Bakugo raised an eyebrow in response. Midoriya fell silent, and another student reacted nervously at the thought of more villains. Aizawa then reminded everyone that the UA Sports Festival was drawing near, and the class erupted into cheers at the prospect of the upcoming school event. Kirishima's cheers were the loudest until Kaminari cut him off. Jairu fretted aloud about whether it was wise to hold a sports festival so soon after villains had infiltrated the school. Ojiro turned to Aizawa and asked what would happen if they were attacked again. Aizawa adjusted his arms and explained that the administration wanted the festival to demonstrate that UA's crisis management was solid. Security would be increased to 5 times previous levels, he said, and the festival was too important to cancel over a single incident. Mineta interrupted to voice his confusion about why that made sense, and Midoriya reminded him that Mineta had never seen a UA sports festival before. Aizawa went on to outline the festival's significance. All the top heroes around the country watched the event for scouting purposes, Yaoyorozu noted. It was the only chance many aspiring heroes had to be noticed, Aizawa emphasized, so everyone needed to prepare thoroughly. The students answered in unison with affirmation. Lunchtime arrived and almost everyone was talking about the sports festival. Reina observed Ida making exaggerated hip movements to get pumped up while Midoriya stood beside him. Ida said he was getting fired up, which Reina found odd. Uraraka suddenly urged Midoriya, Ida, and Takahashi to do their best at the festival, and the group cheered for her enthusiasm. She went on to give the same encouragement to another group and received a more muted response. As they walked toward the cafeteria, Midoriya asked Uraraka why she had chosen to attend UA to become a hero. Uraraka admitted that her motivation was financial. Her family ran a construction company that was struggling, and she hoped to become a hero to support them. She acknowledged feeling embarrassed about the practical reason, but the others responded supportively, with Ida praising her sense of duty. Reina sighed and said her own reason was less noble. When asked why she wanted to be a hero, Reina admitted that she had not chosen the path for herself initially. Her mother had asked her to, believing Reina's quirk was strong and should be used to help others. Reina explained she had no particular dream and had simply followed her mother's wishes. The others reacted with surprise, and Ida commended her sense of responsibility. A booming voice announced that young Midoriya had arrived. Midoriya and his friends turned to see All Might, who invited Midoriya to join him for lunch. Midoriya left with All Might, and Reina followed behind Uraraka and Ida. Uraraka wondered aloud whether All Might's invitation might be related to the USJ incident and the power Midoriya and All Might shared, and Reina shrugged that it could be. A UA teacher named Ectoplasm called for Takahashi, reporting that the principal wanted to see her. Reina followed him to the principal's office. Principal Nizu greeted her warmly and offered her tea and a rice ball. He assured her she was not in trouble and explained that the conversation concerned the USJ incident, specifically the villain group and the Nomu. Nizu said they had secured a Nomu and had been testing its nature. All Might had mentioned that Reina had identified what it might be shortly after seeing it, and the tests had supported her theory that the Nomu had once been a person. Reina agreed and shared her thoughts. She pointed out that quirk trafficking had been rampant 10 years earlier but seemed to have declined. It could be that the trafficking had gone underground or that a buffer system had been put in place to hide it from raids. Nizu acknowledged her ideas while noting that they were still speculative and required further investigation. He noticed Reina's glance toward the chessboard on his office table. Nizu asked if Reina played chess. Reina replied that she did with her father. Her father had introduced her to chess when she was 5, and it was the first activity she had not found bothersome, so she liked it. Nizu remarked that her father was a very brilliant man and brought a board over, setting it up while asking if she cared for a game. Reina agreed. Nizu then turned the conversation to the new villain group and asked Reina if she found anything off about them. Reina said that if Nizu meant their alleged boss, she found his very existence strange. Nizu, interested, asked why she thought so. Reina explained that a man-child like him could not possibly have conducted such a large operation. Obtaining private information from the school, hacking systems, recruiting a whole squad, and having a scientist prepared to create dangerous experiments all seemed beyond his capacity, which Reina judged from a 2-minute meeting. Nizu noted that All Might had said something similar and concluded that Reina believed the apparent boss was not the true ringleader but someone else he answered to. Reina agreed that was possible. Reina then made a quick series of moves and declared checkmate while taking a bite of her rice ball. Nizu smiled wider. Losing in 4 moves was the first time he had ever lost a game. He complimented her sharpness, took a picture of the board for his records, and, still smiling, asked Reina to share any other theories she had so he could consider them. Nizu's calm demeanor, given that the school had recently been attacked, unsettled Reina. She finished her food and, after a moment, offered another observation. If the rap-covered villain called Kurogiri had a quirk like that, it would have been easier to find All Might in a secluded area and ambush him while he was vulnerable. Instead, they had staged the USJ attack to create a spectacle, gain notoriety, and encourage more villains to act, possibly to recruit them. She warned Nizu that she would expect more villain activity in the future, both inside and outside UA. Later that afternoon at 3:20 p.m., a large crowd of students blocked the door to Class 1A. Ida pushed to the front to ask what business they had with the class. Mineta cried out that they could not get out. Bakugo shoved past Midoriya and Mineta, telling the crowd that they were merely scouting the enemy and making his way toward the door. Kirishima moved to restrain him, worried that Bakugo's aggression was escalating the situation. A boy with messy purple hair pushed forward and said he had come to see what the famous Class A was like. He complained about the perceived arrogance of Hero Course students and expressed disillusionment, noting that many students had enrolled in other courses because they had not made the Hero Course. He suggested that, depending on the sports festival results, transfers between courses might be considered. Ida, Uraraka, and Midoriya visibly recoiled at the accusation. The purple-haired boy told them he had come with a declaration of war and threatened to humble them. A silver-haired boy from the neighboring Class B also appeared, announcing that he had heard they had fought villains and had come to hear about it, accusing them not to get full of themselves. Bakugo responded that it did not matter and pushed past the silver-haired boy to leave. Kirishima urged him to stop, reminding him that his behavior had helped provoke the crowd. Bakugo insisted that it did not matter so long as they rose to the top and continued on. Reina slung her bag over her shoulder and positioned herself near the door, calling the whole spectacle a drag. Someone in the crowd addressed her by name. Reina turned and looked at the crowd, focusing on the purple-haired boy. She observed that he seemed the sort to blame UA for maintaining selective entrance criteria and suggested, based on his appearance, that he did not appear to have a strength-enhancing quirk. She told him to stop whining and get over himself. Reina pointed out that some students in her class had quirks that were not suited for combat, yet they had made it into the hero course. Others had quirks that harmed them if overused, yet they had succeeded. His complaints were excuses to avoid facing his own lack of skill, she said. The purple-haired boy grew angry, but Reina paid him little mind and then turned toward the silver-haired boy. She addressed the idea that the class was at fault for being attacked, warning that viewing schoolmates' danger as self-inflicted was a form of victim blaming. Reina told the crowd that if they saw their peers that way, perhaps they did not belong in the hero course or at the school. There was a reason her classmates were in the classroom while they were outside. As she moved toward the door, Reina shoved the purple-haired boy's shoulder and told him to move. Some students scoffed and whispered, others walked away. Reina wondered why she had allowed herself to be offended when she had not worked that hard for her place. She could not explain it, but the way the students treated an incident in which their homeroom teacher had been seriously injured as a joke irritated her. She decided it had been troublesome and that she should have simply walked away. 2 weeks remained until the UA Sports Festival. The school allowed students to practice on any available facility grounds, and most of them made full use of it. Almost all were immersed in training. Almost. Nori's eye twitched when she saw her daughter still asleep in bed. Nori called for Reina, jolting her awake. Reina yelped, then groaned at her mother and complained that Nori was supposed to be at her company. Nori explained that she had come to check on the sports festival preparations and noted that it did not seem to be happening. Reina looked away and admitted she had been conserving her energy. Nori raised an eyebrow and suggested practicing at ground gamma or ground omega. Reina admitted she only knew ground beta. Nori sighed and described ground omega as a forest where shadows could be practiced in the dark and ground gamma as a maze of pipes. Reina, remembering her past as a student there, balked. Reina argued that pitting students against one another was inefficient and suggested recording progress for professionals to watch instead. Nori replied that professionals did not have the time and that the sports festival was the more practical option. Reina groaned again and complained about the attention her class would receive, but Nori moved closer and warned her to at least try, reminding her that she would be watching. Reina shivered at the reminder and resolved to make it to at least the 3rd round. The eagerly awaited sports festival day arrived. Class 1A gathered in the waiting room, a mix of nerves and confidence among them. Ida stepped in to ask if everyone was ready and announced that they would be entering soon. Yaoyorozu asked the relaxed girl if she was nervous, and Takahashi replied that she was not. Jairu, shaking her hands, admitted that her own hands would not stop trembling from nerves. Todoroki drew the class's attention by looking at Midoriya and asserting that, objectively, he was stronger than Midoriya. He acknowledged that all might seem to be watching Midoriya and said he intended to beat him. Midoriya, surprised, agreed that Todoroki was stronger but insisted he could not afford to fall behind and that he would give everything he had. Kaminari teased about a declaration of war, and Kirishima put a hand on Todoroki's shoulder to try to calm things down, reminding them they were about to start. Todoroki shrugged him off and said this was not about being friends. Reina sighed at the tension and told them such a declaration was troublesome and would not get them anywhere. Todoroki told her to stay out of it, but Reina walked past him, noting that his reaction to Midoriya getting attention was an overblown ego and calling him the biggest drag in the class. Present Mike began the public announcements, amping up the crowd for the event. The spectators roared, and the students could feel the excitement and pressure from the audience. Reina noticed the other first years casting sidelong glances and hostile looks toward their class, while also recognizing that their presence had drawn a lot of attention. When the player pledge came, the adult hero Midnight stood at the podium to represent the students, wearing a costume that some found daring for a school event. Kirishima looked away with a blush, and Tokoyami voiced concern about whether it was appropriate for an adult hero with that reputation to be present at a high school event. Reina thought Midnight's choice of outfit was unsuitable for a school setting and wished she had chosen something more fitting for the audience. Bakugo Katsuki from Class 1A was introduced to represent the students, and he marched up to the microphone with blunt confidence, declaring his intention to win. Reina expected his bluntness and watched as the rest of the students responded with boos and protests. Ida criticized Bakugo's behavior with rigid formality, while Bakugo dismissed the crowd and returned to the sidelines with a thumbs down. A student from Class 1B shouted that Bakugo was overconfident and threatened to crush him, and Reina observed that Bakugo's voice carried certainty and force that matched his aggressive attitude. He was not merely arrogant, but dangerous in his resolve. The first event was a 4-kilometer obstacle course race. The first years lined up at the starting gates. Reina stared up at the clouds and questioned whether getting up early for this had been worth it. When the race began, chaos erupted as everyone tried to push ahead. Reina sighed at the jostling, then leapt and landed on a wall to gain her footing. Using her quirk, Reina ran along the surface and made it out. Just as she did, her feet froze to the ground. Todoroki apologized as he ran past her, spreading ice and freezing others as well. Reina watched several classmates Bakugo, Yaoyorozu, Ioma, and Kirishima break through. Yaoyorozu called Todoroki naive as she ran past Reina, and one by one the others followed. She thought it a drag but prepared to break out as well. Reina sighed, summoned a shadow whip to free herself, and ran after her classmates, using her shadows to maintain her grip until she reached the end of the ice path. Present Mike then announced that the first obstacle was Robo Inferno. The robots were the mock villains from the entrance exam, more troublesome now that they had been repurposed for the event. Todoroki examined them and wondered about where the equipment had come from. Yaoyorozu wondered aloud about the funding. Someone mentioned government budgets, donations, media money, and festival proceeds as likely sources. Todoroki activated his ice quirk and froze the robots solid. A classmate suggested slipping between their legs to pass, but Todoroki warned that freezing them had made them unbalanced and they began to topple. Reina waited until the surrounding robots settled, then used her quirk to form a shadow slide and swept away from the danger zone. She used shadow whips as a swing to vault over the larger robots and broke into a run again. More robots charged at her, so she used her shadows as a swing to pull through. Upon landing, the whips wrapped around 2 robots and immobilized them, causing them to collapse and shut down. Reina felt tired and decided to focus on running. She slowed at the second part of the course as Present Mike announced that it was the fall obstacle. Reina judged this would be one of the easier challenges. She ran straight at the rope and kept running. Present Mike commented admiringly on Reina's fearless approach and explained that her quirk let her shadow adhere to surfaces and form a walkable path, while her balance made the maneuver effortless. Present Mike also credited her sensei for the technique. Todoroki glanced back to see Reina behind him, with Bakugo trailing as well. Reina did not want to attract too much attention and cringed at the commentary. She eased off slightly, allowing Bakugo to blast past. Present Mike then announced that the last barrier was a landmine. Reina wondered briefly about the legality, but the commentary reassured the audience that the mines caused no real harm beyond loud, embarrassing blasts. A few candidates behind her were startled by the noisy detonations. Reina moved carefully, scanning the layout and realizing the mines followed a pattern rather than being random. She adjusted her footing into an odd curve and advanced, leaving confused classmates behind. Todoroki and Bakugo were occupied with trying to slow each other and did not notice her closing in. A large, noisy blast erupted behind them. Reina looked back and saw Midoriya riding on a piece of robot debris, propelling himself forward. Present Mike announced that Midoriya had taken the lead. Reina thought the stakes were high, given how everyone hoped to be scouted. Todoroki and Bakugo abandoned their rivalry and sprinted for the finish line. Midoriya used the debris to shield and launch himself, clearing the minefield in an impressive burst that pushed competitors behind him forward. Present Mike praised Class A, and Eraserhead shrugged off the compliment, insisting he had not directly coached them for this. Present Mike then declared that the first person back in the stadium was Midoriya Izuku. Reina arrived fourth, dropped to the side, and lay on her back as the crowd cheered and more classmates made it across. When she saw Uraraka, Reina stood and joined her. Uraraka was busy praising Midoriya. Ida stood slightly off to the side, muttering about being left behind because of his quirk and exaggerating his disappointment, which made Reina roll her eyes. Midnight then presented the results. Everyone from Reina's class had made it except Ioma, and none of the students from Class B advanced. The only non-hero core students to progress were the purple-haired boy and the support class girl. Midnight announced that the top 42 had advanced and reassured those who did not make it that other opportunities would be available, delivering the message with a theatrical flourish that made Reina cringe. Midnight introduced the next game, Cavalry Battle. She explained the rules and how points would be assigned according to each player's position, and she revealed that the point value for the first-place player would be 10 million. Many eyes turned to Midoriya. Reina glanced up at the sky and noted to herself that she was worth 195 points, an observation that did not improve her mood. It emphasized that higher-ranked students would face greater pressure, invoking the event's catchphrase about striving beyond limits, and then announced that they had 15 minutes to form teams. Students began to cluster and pair off. Reina stood apart, considering her options. She would have asked Yaoyorozu to join her, but Yaoyorozu had already teamed up with Todoroki. Biting down on some energy tablets, Reina thought about the matchup. She needed to be on the ground so she could use her shadow trap if required. For that she needed teammates who already had high enough points, because while her defense should be perfect, she would have little to offer offensively. She called Tokoyami by name and proposed they team up, saying that their combined darkness could overwhelm their enemies. Tokoyami deadpanned at the line, then nodded and shook her hand. Reina noted that his shadow could provide the offensive edge they lacked. Midoriya then stepped forward with Uraraka, determination clear on his face, and asked them to team up. Present Mix's voice announced that the matches were about to begin, with Aizawa muttering an annoyed remark in the background. All teams were instructed to form their horsemen. In Reina's team, Tokoyami took the front, Reina stood on the right, Uraraka on the left, and Midoriya rode in the center. When the game began, every team rushed toward them. Reina had expected that and sighed at what was coming. Tokoyami urged Midoriya to make his choice. Midoriya replied that their move would be to run away. A student from Class B declared that they would not allow it, and the ground beneath them briefly softened, causing them to sink. Recognizing the quirk, Reina used her shadow whips to secure enemy members into rope-like bindings. Uraraka then used her ability to make them float. Jiru sent her earphone jacks toward them, but Dark Shadow countered the attack. Midoriya complemented Tokoyami's quirk, and Reina used hers to keep the captured opponents swinging forward until they landed in a relatively safe zone. They were soon pursued again. Ajui's team attacked from hiding within Shoji's arms and forced them to leap into the air once more. A loud blast sounded as Bakugo leapt, aiming for Midoriya's head, but Dark Shadow shielded the group. Reina sent a shadow whip to knock Bakugo back so he was caught by his teammates. They landed and began running again, still near the top of the field. If they kept their momentum, they could win. The team skidded to a stop when Todoroki's team blocked their path. Tokoyami observed that Todoroki seemed to think highly of Midoriya. Reina warned that only half the time remained and urged everyone not to stop moving, noting that multiple groups were coming for them. Kaminari activated his quirk at high voltage. Dark Shadow acted a defense against the electricity while other teams were affected. Todoroki then froze the ground. Reina used her whips to free them and swung the team away, though her footing faltered from fatigue. Midoriya looked to her with concern at her sweating form. Tokoyami sent Dark Shadow forward to restrain the attackers, and Todoroki called for Yaoyorozu, who countered with a hard shield. Midoriya worried that the creation was difficult to handle, and Reina noted that Kaminari's continuing discharges made attacking dangerous because Dark Shadow would become timid near so much electricity. She also observed that the opponent's rollerblades made trapping them harder. Their team found themselves backed into a corner. Ida suddenly accelerated toward them with incredible speed, surprising Present Mike, who commented on his pace. In a matter of seconds, Todoroki's team had taken their headband. Ida explained that he had challenged Midoriya. Reina watched Midoriya's teammates panic for a moment before she asked Midoriya how badly he wanted to win. Midoriya answered that he wanted to win more than anything. Reina dismissed the sentiment as troublesome for a moment, then asked Tokoyami to support her. Tokoyami agreed. Reina gathered her shadow at their feet and announced that this would be her final move for the stage. Her shadow shot up at record speed and wrapped around Todoroki's team, binding them all. Reina held the end. Kaminari panicked as his team was pulled forward, and Reina tugged the materialized shadow to draw them in. Reina signaled Midoriya, who immediately activated his quirk and aimed for the headbands. Todoroki's left arm flared with a brief burst of flame, and Midoriya used the moment of surprise to sweep up a headband. Reina twisted her foot and sent a shadow sliding so their team moved far away from Todoroki's reach. Uraraka remarked that the headband they had was numbered 70, prompting Yaoyorozu to reveal that they had intentionally changed the headband positions as a trick. Bakugo and his team rushed in, but the time limit expired as he leapt, and he fell flat. Present Mike announced the end of the second round and revealed the standings. Todoroki's team placed first, Bakugo's team second, and a surprise third place went to Team Shinso. Reina stood, emotion unreadable, and explained to Yaoyorozu that drawing attention to Midoriya had been part of their plan. Reina and Tokoyami held up 2 headbands as proof. Present Mike named Team Midoriya in 4th place, and those 4 teams advanced to the final round. At the announcement, Midoriya began to cry uncontrollably. Reina doubled over and fell to the ground. Uraraka expressed concern and knelt beside her. Reina's head spun as she stared up at the sky, overwhelmed by fatigue and wishing simply to go home and sleep. Dark Shadow offered her a water bottle while Present Mike announced a 1-hour lunch break before the afternoon events. Reina ate lunch with the other girls as they discussed what had happened and what had not. She, Uraraka, Yaoyorozu, and Ashido were the only ones to advance to the 3rd round. Yaoyorozu admitted that she had been outsmarted by Takahashi and had not expected such a comeback. Reina hummed while munching on her sandwich and praised Yaoyorozu for using rollerblades to match Ida's speed and counter a trap. Jiro complimented Reina on her sharp performance and the edgy dynamic she had with Tokoyami. Hagakure cheerfully admitted she had shivered watching the action. Azui teasingly suggested the shivering might have had a different cause, and Reina sighed, standing up and announcing that she planned to rest and did not want to be disturbed. The others nodded and continued their chatter as she left. Reina walked down the corridor toward the locker room, yawning as she replied to the string of excited messages from her family. Her mother was watching from her office and sent enthusiastic encouragements, and Reina replied to each one as she settled into the neutral locker room. She plopped onto the couch and was about to sleep when Todoroki, their half-and-half classmate, entered and made the atmosphere awkward. Todoroki blinked and asked if this was the girls' locker room. Reina informed him that it was the neutral one. He explained that he only needed to stay until someone left because his father was watching. Reina, finding the situation awkward, considered leaving but stayed put and made herself comfortable. Todoroki then expressed concern about the cavalry battle, noting that when he had used his left side, the flames had come close to Reina's face and asked if she was all right. Reina found the concern unexpected, given how often he had used ice against her in the past, and she briefly wondered whether some experience had made him reluctant to use fire. Her eyes lingered on his scar, thinking it might explain that reluctance. After a long moment of mutual scrutiny, Reina dismissed the incident as minor compared to the times his ice had restrained her, and called him troublesome for being hard to read. Todoroki insisted that he had not broken any rules, but Reina clarified she meant he was confusing and inconsistent. She then turned away and closed her eyes, telling him that his father was probably gone and he could leave. Confused by her disregard, Todoroki left the locker room. Present Mike then announced that, with lunch over, it was time to reveal the last game. Reina yawned as she made her way back to the arena, having slept through the break. Present Mike explained that, since this was a sports festival, recreational games had been prepared for everyone who had not made the finals, and that cheerleaders had been brought in to liven things up. Reina blinked in confusion when she saw that some of their classmates were also wearing cheer outfits. The girls from Class A found themselves in cheerleading outfits with pom-poms. Kaminari and Mineta were grinning nearby, their intentions obvious. Yaoyorozu lamented being tricked and explained that she had even used her creation quirk to produce the outfits. Uraraka moved to comfort her. Jairu angrily tossed her pom-poms aside and covered up, insisting she would not participate in the cheer. Hagakure waved a pom-pom and seemed unbothered by the prank, while Azui observed that Toru seemed to enjoy the situation. Reina, relieved she had not been caught in the prank, handed her pea jacket to Jairu, who gratefully hid behind it. Present Mike continued by explaining that, after the recreational games, the 16 finalists from the 4 teams who had advanced would face off in a one-on-one tournament. Midnight took the stage to explain the format and held up a box from which the finalists would draw lots to determine matchups. Some students expressed excitement at standing on the stage they usually watched on television, and others noted that the finals were always structured differently each year. Midnight reminded the finalists that they could participate in the activities or sit out to conserve stamina for the battles to come. A student attempted to interrupt the explanation, drawing attention back to the stage. Ojiro interrupted her and announced that he was withdrawing, which made those around him gasp in surprise. Midoriya asked why, and Ida pointed out that this was a rare chance for professionals to see them. Ojiro explained that he barely remembered anything from the cavalry battle until almost the end and that he suspected the purple-haired boy in the crowd had used a quirk. He admitted it was a great opportunity but felt he could not stand on stage with everyone else without knowing what really happened. Midoriya stepped forward, visibly concerned. Ojiro insisted that he could not be among those who had given their all when he did not know the truth. Pom-poms rustled behind him as Hagakure protested that he was overthinking things and urged him to prove himself in the finals. Ashido added that she had not done much in the cavalry battle either. Ojiro said it was a matter of pride and asked why all the girls except Reina were wearing cheerleading uniforms, which made the girls sulk and Reina respond with a deadpan expression. The icy-haired student from Class B, Nairenjiki Shoda, stepped forward and announced his intention to withdraw for the same reason, arguing that allowing those who had not acted in the cavalry battle to advance went against the spirit of the sports festival. Kirishima cheered them on theatrically, calling their decision manly, while Midnight cracked her whip and dismissed their talk as naive. She then declared that she approved of the withdrawals, and the reaction from the student body suggested many shared that sentiment. 2 other students from Class B were promoted. Reina recognized one as the boy who had stood in front of her class that day. The bracket pairings were revealed. Reina located her name and found that she would face Ashido Mina in a rematch from battle training. Ashido grinned and prepared for the match. Reina agreed to the rematch. The others went to recreational events while Reina and Jairu returned to the locker rooms so Jairu could change. Jairu grumbled that he could not believe the others had gone along with the trick. When Reina asked what they had said, he explained that they had told him teacher Aizawa wanted them to take part in a cheer battle against visiting cheerleaders and had claimed Reina was already changed and waiting. Reina sighed that should have been an obvious giveaway. Jairu insisted he had objected. To calm them both, Reina bought vending machine-flavored milk. Jair chose banana and Reina chose strawberry. The third round began after Cementos built a platform for the students to fight on. Reina sat in the stands with Ida and Uraraka while Present Mike explained the victory conditions, 30 minutes per match, with victory achieved by immobilizing opponents or forcing them out of bounds. In the first match, Midoriya faced Shinso Hitoshi. Reina watched as Midoriya's eyes glazed and he began to follow Shinso's commands, revealing Shinso's mind control quirk or a variant of it. Encouraging Midoriya to speak had likely been the trigger. Ida fretted about the danger of being forced out of bounds. Ojiro confirmed that he had warned Midoriya. Suddenly, a gust swept across the arena as Midoriya fought through the control, prompting Ida to cheer in relief. Midoriya then rushed Shinso and forced him out of bounds to win and advance. He joined them in the stands as they watched the rest of the matches. The next match was Todoroki vs. Zero. Todoroki froze his opponent within seconds, a move Reina thought would be unpleasant for Zero. The following match was Kaminari against Shiozaki from Class B, and Shiozaki emerged victorious. Reina watched with a blank expression as Midoriya muttered about her quirk and took notes in a notebook. Uraraka and most of their classmates seemed unsettled while Bakugo only grew angrier. Reina sighed, rose, and went downstairs as Uraraka and Midoriya continued to talk. Her match was scheduled after Ida's, so she waited in the preparation room, chewing an energy tablet while watching Ida's match on the television. She felt awkward as a support student used Ida to promote her items before exiting the ring. When it was time for her match, Present Mike announced that the fifth match would be Takahashi Reina of Class A versus Ishido Mina of Class A. Ishido immediately surged forward, deploying her acid and asserting that if her feet did not cast a shadow she could not be controlled. Reina moved across her own shadow to avoid being manipulated and backflipped into a safe zone as Ishido tried to land a punch under her chin. Ishido continued to throw acid. Reina noted that Ishido fought with reckless impulse. Ishido closed in with a fist that Reina ducked, then swung a leg she avoided by jumping and countered with a kick to Ishido's ribs that sent her stumbling. As Reina landed, she suddenly found that she could not move properly. It became clear that when Reina had chosen to engage in close combat, she had connected her shadow to Ishido's. Present Mike explained that Reina had linked her shadow to Ishido's, effectively turning Ishido into a puppet and using the technique as her signature finishing move. Reina stepped forward, forcing Ishido back and then out of bounds. The announcer declared Ishido out and Reina advancing to the next round, and the crowd cheered while Ishido complained. Uraraka wondered aloud how she had fallen for it twice. Reina patted her shoulder and reassured her that she had done well. Reina observed that Bakugo was acting like a feminist. Jairu fretted over the state of her friend, incredulous that anyone would call that a feminist. Reina argued that Bakugo was giving her a fair fight by not holding back, since holding back would be disrespectful. Reina admitted she did not know him well but that the display made her respect him a little. Aizawa stepped in to stop the crowd from booing and pitying Uraraka, and his takeover of the commentary quieted everyone. In the end, Bakugo won. The second round would begin once Kirishima and the Steel Boy finished their arm wrestling match. Reina left the stands and went down to the waiting rooms to find her friends. In the corridor she saw Endeavor talking with Midoriya and hesitated about leaving, but then she climbed onto the ceiling and moved along quietly so they would not notice. Midoriya told Endeavor that he was not All Might and that Todoroki was not Endeavor either. Endeavor left, and Midoriya remained alone in the corridor. Reina dropped down, startling Midoriya, who stammered in surprise at how long she had been there. Reina told him she had been there only a couple of minutes and had been trying not to be seen. She reminded him about his upcoming match and he ran off. Reina turned and noticed Uraraka emerging from a waiting room, her face streaked as if she had been crying. Reina asked what had happened to her eyes. Uraraka brushed it off and suggested they go see Midoriya's match. She looped her arm with Reina's and dragged her back to the stands. Once they were settled, the match began and proved intense. Reina worried about Midoriya's unhinged behavior. Time passed until Midoriya suddenly shouted that the power belonged to Todoroki, not his father. That outburst seemed to trigger Todoroki, who burst into flames on his fireside. Endeavor, the number 2 pro hero, yelled Shoto's name and approached the railing with a twisted smile, declaring that Todoroki had finally accepted his power and that, with his blood fueling him, Todoroki would surpass him and fulfill Endeavor's ambitions. Reina recognized the familiar pattern of a parent pushing failed ambitions onto a child and contrasted it with her own situation, where her mother had given her a choice to try. From what she saw of the Todoroki family, her classmate had not been given that kind of choice. Still, Todoroki wanted to become a hero, and his conduct at USJ had already made that clear. Endeavor's ambition was to surpass All Might, and that pressure explained the mentions of All Might in the match. The match ended with Midoriya out of bounds and Todoroki declared the winner. Round 2 proceeded. Reina was paired against the girl from Class B, Shiozaki. Reina won by swinging her opponent and throwing her out of bounds. Shiozaki had put up a fight that later required a visit to Recovery Girl. 4 contestants remained: Takahashi, Tokoyami, Todoroki, and Bakugo. The screen displayed the semi-final matchups: Tokoyami vs. Bakugo, and Todoroki vs. Takahashi. Reina stared at the screen while her friends tried to motivate her. The class representative urged her, moving energetically as he encouraged her to give it her all. Midoriya nodded rapidly with both arms in casts. Uraraka shook Reina and urged her to do her best. Present Mike announced that the semifinals would begin and called the first match. Reina sighed and walked down to stand opposite her middle school acquaintance, Todoroki Shoto. The announcer introduced Todoroki as the half-and-half boy and Reina as the shadow user from Class A, and the semi-final duel began. They held a momentary standoff before Todoroki sent ice toward Reina. She evaded the attack by using her shadow whips and repeatedly employed the same tactic to escape and reposition. The announcers noted that Takahashi had been surrounded. Reina dropped into a crouch and watched Todoroki closely as he sent another wave of ice. She slipped into her shadow and reappeared behind one of his ice formations. Spectators and commentators reacted with surprise at her sudden movements. Reina attempted to strike but Todoroki dodged and launched more ice, which she again avoided with her shadow travel. The two exchanged evasions and feints for 27 minutes, testing the crowd's patience. With only 3 minutes remaining, Todoroki began to falter. He had not been able to use his fireside to warm himself and frost was building around him. Reina paused and looked up at the sky. Assuming his opponent needed a moment to recover, Todoroki activated his fireside to warm himself, the flames igniting sparingly. Reina seized the moment. As his body tightened, he realized his shadow had connected with hers in a linked hold before he could react. Commentators exclaimed that Takahashi had used her ultimate technique on Todoroki and that the match might finally be over. Reina walked to the center of the stadium, and Todoroki followed. She raised her hand, and Todoroki mirrored the motion while he looked down, crushed and defeated. Then Reina surprised everyone by stepping back and announcing that she was giving up. The stadium erupted in confusion and protest. Uraraka and the others could not believe she was serious. Present Mike called out in disbelief. Reina released her quirk, rubbed the back of her neck, and explained that she had used all her energy in the shadow travel and only had enough for another minute, the same amount of time left in the match. Even if she won, she would not have the stamina for the finals, so she chose to forfeit. Midnight and other professionals in the stands reacted with surprise and frustration. A pro stood and demanded to know why she would give up in the middle of such an important contest. A pro shouted at Reina and Todoroki, asking if they would give up in front of a villain, if they would let people die, and if that was the kind of hero they wanted to be. Reina blinked calmly and told them that Todoroki was not a villain and that this was not a life-or-death scenario. She pointed out the arena around them and explained that the ice had confined the danger to an isolated area. No further damage had spread beyond that point. Reina added that she had managed to hold him back until the time limit and that, if there had been a real emergency, she would have waited for backup. The priority, she said, was the safety of civilians rather than winning. The pro who had shouted fell quiet and shrank back in his seat. Present Mike reacted that it felt anticlimactic, while Aizawa intervened to explain Reina's background. Aizawa noted that Principal Nizu had taken an interest in her from the written entrance exam onward. He recounted how, during the USJ incident, she had gathered crucial information in seconds by analyzing the scene, and how that analysis had proven accurate. Aizawa added that even in the course race she had been the only one to quickly discern the pattern of the landmines. Her ability to make strategic choices under pressure, with so many watching and with multiple factors to consider, was something even veterans struggled with. For that reason, Aizawa said, Principal Nizu had given her a concealed intelligence test disguised as a game of chess a few days before the sports festival. Reina blinked at that explanation, realizing why her picture had been taken. Aizawa continued that the test results had been as expected, beyond genius, with an IQ exceeding 200. Present Mike yelled in disbelief at the figure, Yaoyorozu murmured that it was amazing, and Kaminari turned to his classmates to call it super genius. Midoriya regretted having broken his arms because he had wanted to jot it down in his notebook. Reina sighed as she saw Todoroki's open-mouthed expression. She thought it a bother and, inwardly, that she had already come up with 300 other plans to advance before deciding it was too troublesome to use them. Jiru protested at the idea of 300 plans, and Ashido pouted about losing. Midnight cracked her whip and declared that Takahashi had forfeited and that Todoroki advanced to the finals. Reina shoved her hands into her pockets and left the arena, but cheers seemed to be directed at her. She stopped in the entrance hallway when she saw her father leaning against a wall with a smirk of amusement. He pulled her into a hug and praised her for using her head in the match, ruffling her hair as Reina leaned into him, exhausted from overusing her quirk. When Reina muttered that it had all been a drag, he explained that he had skipped court to watch and that he was proud of how far she had come, even if the victory had been disguised. She buried her face in his chest and began to feel sleepy. He urged her to meet her friends before sleeping, and then produced 2 strawberry-flavored vending machine milk bottles from his pocket to give her some energy. Near the stage entrance, Tokoyami nodded to Takahashi when she appeared. They had both taken 3rd place in the tournament. Tokoyami complimented her intellect, and Takahashi returned the sentiment, attributing the loss to a bad matchup. They stepped onto their shared podium position, and a minute later Todoroki took his place in 2nd. Bakugo had won the sports festival. 2 men in UA high-security uniforms entered with a stretcher carrying Bakugo, who was tightly restrained with chains and clasps and whose hands were constrained. His mouth was covered by a muzzle. Reina and Tokoyami exchanged uncomfortable looks. Reina questioned whether such restraints were necessary. The attendants wheeled Bakugo to the number 1 pedestal, unhooked some of the restraints to position him, and then resecured him to the wooden pillar behind the platform. Todoroki remained composed, his focus on his left hand. The ceiling opened and the platform began to rise. Midnight announced that it was time to bring out the hardware and that only one person was worthy of distributing the awards. A booming laugh from outside the stadium heralded All Might. The crowd greeted him as the number 1 hero in a chorus of voices. All Might approached the students, placing a medal on Tokoyami and praising the bird-like student's strength while warning him through a heartfelt hug that he would need more training and could not always rely on his quirk. All Might then placed a medal around Takahashi's neck, commending her strategic thinking as surpassing even professionals and encouraging her to continue training. When he tried to embrace her in the customary congratulatory hug, Reina raised a hand and refused the hug. All Might, a little flustered, advised her not to be afraid to leave her comfort zone and patted her back before moving on to the other participants. Reina found the whole exchange troublesome and muttered that it was a drag. After the sports festival concluded, the students returned to school and took their seats in the classroom. Aizawa entered and congratulated the class on their work. Bandages still wrapped around him. His eyes were visible now. He informed them that they had the next 2 days off from school to recuperate, suggested that professionals watching the festival might want to recruit some of them, and said he would review the draft forms and update them when they returned. The students acknowledged the news. Kaminari immediately hurried over to Reina to ask how she was doing, but she groaned and told him to go away. Ever since Aizawa had revealed her intelligence, Kaminari had been asking her odd, unhelpful questions about everything from the origins of chickens and eggs to the possibility of alien causes for quirks. His constant curiosity was driving her insane. He pouted and walked away with his head hung low at her refusal, Shiro patted his back in comfort and gave Reina an apologetic smile. Reina glanced around the classroom. Bakugo still smoldered, the competition medal hanging from his mouth. Her real concern was the empty seat. Ida had left early due to a family emergency as soon as her match ended. Their teacher had said that Ingenium had been hurt by a villain. Ida looked on the verge of tears but was hiding it, and Reina was not sure whether Uraraka or Midoriya had noticed. The class was dismissed and everyone packed their things. On the walk toward her house, Reina accused her father of planning something. He teased her about looking for evidence, and she pointed out the gleam in his eyes. He pretended to object but then went ahead to open the door. Before she could get inside, her mother enveloped her in a tight hug and congratulated her enthusiastically, talking about how proud she had been during the semifinals and how impressed she was by Reina's reasoning. Their father seemed to enjoy the scene. That night her mother arranged a celebratory dinner and continued to praise Reina's performance, insisting that top professionals might take her into their agencies. After the meal, Reina went to bed, woke up the following evening at 6, and then returned to bed at 10. The morning she returned to UA was gloomy and rainy. Reina walked toward the building under her umbrella and was dropped off at the entrance by her mother to avoid the chaos of public transport. Inside the classroom, Ashido mentioned that people on the street had recognized them from TV and wanted to talk, and Kirishima agreed. Hagakure said the attention had been a little embarrassing, and Ojiro laughed quietly that such attention was normal for her. Shiro complained that an elementary schooler had told him not to mind, and Azui repeated the phrase playfully, making Shiro complain louder. Relieved that she had arrived more privately, Reina approached Ida and asked about his brother. Ida reassured her that there was no need to worry and apologized if he had caused any concern. His smile, however, did not reach his eyes. Reina understood from earlier reports that Ingenium's injuries were severe enough that he would probably have to retire early. She hesitated, patted Ida's shoulder, and returned to her seat as Aizawa entered the classroom. The students greeted Aizawa together. His bandages were gone, and Azui noted with relief that he had recovered enough to remove them. Aizawa explained that the treatment had been intense and announced that they would be having a special hero informatics class that day. A long silence followed as many students braced for a pop quiz. Aizawa then instructed them to come up with hero names. The class erupted in excitement, which Aizawa quelled by briefly activating his quirk. He explained that the exercise related to the pro-hero draft picks he had mentioned earlier. Drafts became serious in the second and third years, after students had gained more experience and could immediately contribute to professional teams. Offers extended to first years reflected interest in their future potential, but those offers could be withdrawn if that interest faded before graduation. Midoriya asked whether they would have to prove themselves after being picked. Aizawa confirmed that being selected carried expectations and responsibilities. He then displayed the totals of offers some students had received, and the numbers drew astonished reactions. The tally showed Todoroki with 4,123 offers, Bakugo with 3,556, Takahashi with 1,087, Tokoyami with 360, Ito with 301, Kaminari with 272, Yaoyorozu with 108, Kirishima with 68, Uraraka with 20, and Shiro with Takahashi was surprised at how many offers she had received despite having forfeited earlier. Kaminari threw his head back in disbelief at the disparity. Jiro questioned the placement of Todoroki and Bakugo at the top, and Kirishima observed that the draft rankings were the reverse of their positions in the sports festival. Shiro muttered that some professionals might be intimidated by a student who had to be restrained on the podium, and Bakugo erupted angrily in response, demanding to know what the pros could possibly be afraid of. Yaoyorozu sighed and complimented Todoroki and Takahashi on their impressive attention from the pros. Todoroki replied in his usual monotone and attributed his attention to his father. Reina sighed and rested her head on her desk. Aizawa reminded the class that regardless of how many offers they had received, everyone would participate in internships with professional heroes. Midoriya asked what that would involve. Aizawa explained that although they already had combat experience from the attack on the USJ facility, seeing professionals at work in the field and up close would be invaluable. Sato noted the connection to choosing hero names, and Aizawa added that most hero names at this stage would likely be temporary. He then moved on to the rest of the lesson. The door burst open and Midnight strode in, warning the students that they would have hell to pay later. She took her place at the front of the room, and Reina shrank back and covered her face. Aizawa agreed with Midnight and explained that choosing a hero name helped students shape a clearer image of who they wanted to be. He used All Might as an example of how names and nature could align. Reina took the last whiteboard being passed down the rows and watched with envy as Aizawa settled back into his sleeping bag. Reina dreaded having to think of a hero name that would be meaningful, original, and witty, but she also worried about being stuck with something odd. She found the whole task tiring. After some brainstorming time, Midnight announced they would begin presenting names, starting with those who felt ready. Aoyama was first. He proudly held his board up with a long phrase that several students silently noted was more of a sentence than a name. Midnight edited Aoyama's board, suggesting a shorter, cleaner form, and Aoyama brightened at the change. Ashido jumped up to present next with a bold choice, but Midnight recoiled at the comparison the name implied and rejected it. Ashido returned to her seat disappointed and muttered that she had thought it was a great name. Azui revealed a name she had kept since elementary school, Rainy Season Hero, Froppy. Midnight approved, and the mood in the classroom shifted from anxious to lively. Many students cheered and chanted Froppy, and the mood carried forward as more creative names were offered. Red Riot, Earphone Jack, Tentacle, Cellophane, Tailman, Pinky, Sugarman, Chargebolt, Invisible Girl, and Creati. Todoroki surprised everyone by deciding to use his own name, Shoto. Midnight questioned the simplicity of the choice, and Todoroki confirmed that he was content with it. Tokoyami named himself Jet Black Hero, Tsukoyami. Bakugo's proposed name King Explosion Murder was rejected. Koda chose a hero name that reflected his affinity for animals. When it was Reina's turn, she stood with her usual blank expression, causing her classmates to watch in anticipation. She turned her board to reveal Shadow Hero, Silhouette. The class applauded, and Midnight praised the choice. Reina admitted she had chosen it for its wit and because it fit her quirk and abilities. Midnight smiled and approved. Uraraka chose Uravity. When Midoriya stepped forward, everyone reacted to his choice and questioned him. Midoriya explained that he used to dislike his name, but someone had taught him a different meaning for it and that changed how he felt. He now embraced it. Uraraka beamed at him, and Reina observed the exchange. Ida decided to use his own name, and Bakugo remained undecided. Aizawa woke and addressed the class about their upcoming one-week internships. He explained that those on the board would choose from a set of offers, while everyone else would receive a different list. Around 40 agencies across the country had agreed to take interns, each with different specialties. Midnight added that students should consider the type of work they wanted to learn, giving an example about choosing a rescue-focused agency versus a combat-focused one. Aizawa handed out the papers and instructed them to turn in their choices before the weekend. He left the classroom with Midnight, and Ciro voiced the class's anxiety about having only 2 days to decide. Aizawa urged them to make their decisions efficiently and dismiss the class. At lunch, the students in Class A worried over which agency to pick. Midoriya muttered to himself, and Reina nudged him with her notebook to snap him out of it. He apologized and explained he had been lost in thought. Azui commented on how carefully he was thinking, and some classmates gathered around him. Uraraka announced that she had already decided. She planned to intern with the battle-oriented agency Gunhead. Midoriya and Reina reacted with surprise at her choice. Reina noted that Uraraka wanted to learn hand-to-hand combat, and Uraraka confirmed that becoming stronger would open up more possibilities for her future. If she only did what she wanted, her perspective would narrow. Uraraka frowned at Midoriya and observed that he was trembling. Midoriya explained that it was the air chair exercise. Reina left the crowd as they began discussing agencies and stood near Ida. She asked him what he had decided. Ida stared at the sheet in his hands, spaced out, and had left his preferences blank. When Reina asked if he was having trouble, he admitted he was a bit unsettled but insisted he would be fine and would pick the right agency according to his agenda. Reina inwardly wondered why he spoke that way. Before she could press further, Jiraiya and Yaoyorozu called Reina over and invited her to lunch. Reina gave Ida a reassuring pat on the shoulder before following them. In the cafeteria, the two girls discussed offers and agencies. Jiraiya sighed about having to choose from 40 options and remarked that Reina and Yaoyorozu had received many offers. Yaoyorozu deflected praise toward Mr. Takahashi. Reina, chewing, suggested genetics as the reason for her intellect. She thought of her father, the only person who could beat her at chess. Jiraiya expressed envy. Yaoyorozu revealed she would be interning with pro-hero Iwabami and expected to learn a great deal there. Reina admitted she was unsure but had a few agencies in mind and considered Night Eye, All Might's former sidekick, as a second preference based on the offer she had found. The rest of the school day passed normally. In the evening, Ida did not accompany Reina, Uraraka, and Midoriya to the station as he usually did. Midoriya had received an offer, which made Uraraka happy as she thought of the upcoming internship. Midoriya and Reina shared a silent, concerned glance. Both were worried about Ida. At the train station, Teacher Aizawa handed out hero costumes and reminded Class A that they were not permitted to wear them in public yet and warned them not to drop them. Ashido responded enthusiastically, which prompted Aizawa to correct her manners, instructing proper speech. He also reminded them to mind their manners with the other heroes during internships before dismissing them. Reina watched Midoriya and Uraraka reach out to Ida and talk. She noticed Todoroki watching Ida as well. Reina asked Todoroki if he had noticed the same thing. Todoroki agreed that it was hard not to notice and trailed off. Reina sighed at the thought that Ida was going to host the city for his internship and hoped he would not do anything reckless. After another moment of watching Ida's retreating figure, Reina waved goodbye to Midoriya and Uraraka and boarded the train to Shinjuku. She stood in the lobby of the agency she had chosen, thinking in terms of strategy and efficiency. The pro who would mentor her, Mr. Takahashi Edgeshot, greeted her and welcomed her to Edgeshot Agency. Inside the Ninja Hero's office, Reina noted two sidekicks in the lobby as Edgeshot, ranked number 5 among professionals, spoke to her. He admitted that while he had been impressed by her performance, he had reservations, one being her apparent lack of passion. Reina blinked and braced herself for a motivational lecture, but Edgeshot said they would address that over the week and introduced the sidekicks instead. One sidekick introduced himself as Prowler. He had feline traits and wore attire reminiscent of traditional martial arts. The other, a girl named Iris with white hair and purple eyes, regarded Reina with a smirk and a confident air. They waited expectantly while Reina attempted to introduce herself as Takahashi. Edgeshot interrupted and instructed her to use her hero name instead. Reina then identified herself as the Shadow Hero, Silhouette. Edgeshot approved and led them into the building as he explained that, though she knew basic combat skills, the real question was how far she could integrate her quirk into her fighting. He assigned Iris to spar with Reina. Reina inwardly groaned at the immediate start. Edgeshot directed her to change into her hero costume and brought them to a dojo-like training room padded on walls and floors to prevent injuries. Once in costume, she stood opposite Iris. Prowler signaled the start of the sparring. Iris attacked with a fast multi-hit combo. Reina leaned back and executed a backflip to evade. Iris criticized Reina's relaxed stance and admonished her not to underestimate an upperclassman. Reina retorted dryly, questioning whether she should address Iris as upperclassman. Iris did not directly answer and launched another assault. Reina extended a shadow whip to counter Iris's speed. At that moment, Iris's form dispersed into a swarm of butterflies that surged toward Reina. The butterflies moved with unnerving speed and struck like a flurry of attacks. Reina used her quirk to try to push them away, but they were persistent. Some of the butterflies grazed her, leaving small, stinging scratches and forcing her to stagger back. Reina wondered what kind of quirk this was as she failed to find an opening and used her shadow travel to emerge from Prowler's shadow and hide behind him. Prowler was startled and demanded to know when she had arrived. Iris materialized back into her physical form, standing with a hand on her hip, and reminded him not to underestimate her. Edgeshot observed that Reina's fighting style favored deflection and defense, noting flexibility and mobility but criticizing the lack of a proper stance. He stepped up behind Reina, straightened her posture, and instructed her to stretch her back and raise her head. He added that Prowler would teach her how to throw punches and that her kicks looked languid and would need work. Reina inwardly groaned at how seriously he was taking the training. Training was exhausting. Prowler, bigger and faster, threw her to the ground repeatedly until she had the moves down. He would not let up and would not allow her to give up either. That night, Edgeshot called Reina up to the roof of the agency overlooking the city and asked about the whip-like swingers she had used during the cavalry battle. Reina explained that she could materialize her shadow into whip-like structures that could wrap around any surface. When Edgeshot asked whether that meant any surface, she clarified that it worked so long as she could stretch the shadow around an object's diameter. He then asked about nighttime use. Reina paused and explained that she could still use the whips at night, but she could not nail someone with her shadow or use shadow travel in darkness because those techniques required an actual shadow of the person or object. Edgeshot considered this and said they would see how she could use the whips to increase momentum in urban areas. He called for Iris. The butterfly that had been fluttering around him materialized into the woman, and she confirmed she was ready. Reina asked what they were supposed to do. Iris grinned and encouraged her to jump. Edgeshot sighed and reminded Reina that she had used the swingers during the race, so she should be able to manage moving from one surface to another in the city, treating each surface as a different shape and diameter. He emphasized the need to be constantly aware of surroundings and obstacles, and that this practice applied to night conditions when she would rely solely on the whips. He told her to stand on the railing and stepped up onto it himself to demonstrate trust. Reina climbed beside him. Iris assured Reina that she would be caught if she fell, then transformed into a swarm of butterflies and scattered away. Reina drew a deep breath, looked down at the city, and jumped. She immediately used her quirk to attach whips to nearby objects and began to swing. She managed a few successful swings, with Edgeshot stretching himself thin and using his quirk to keep pace, until she accidentally hooked onto an object that couldn't hold her weight. She nearly fell, but the butterflies kept her afloat and gently placed her onto the roof of a nearby building. Reina muttered to herself about the hassle. Edgeshot called down that this was precisely why they were practicing and reminded her not to wrap her whips around just anything but to be hyper-aware of her surroundings. He told her to try again. The next day, Reina accompanied Edgeshot and his two partners on a mission. They were pursuing a villain who had killed a politician. Iris questioned whether they had to handle this since the suspect had been imprisoned before. Reina recognized the politician. Her father had led a corruption case that had put him in prison a few years earlier, and the man had only been released a month ago. Edgeshot urged professionalism and warned that the murderer was at large and posed a risk to civilians. Prowler asked whether Iris's butterflies had found anything. Iris reported only the same information they already had and then asked Reina if she could spot any leads. They moved through a shady district where even daytime streets felt dim. Edgeshot had gone ahead using his ability to become thinner and faster. Reina frowned and, finding nothing immediately obvious, asked Edgeshot if they were sure they were on the right path. Edgeshot reappeared beside her and said that, based on reports from other pros, the villain should be resting somewhere nearby. Reina thought the whole case felt off. The politician had been killed in his own home. How had the villain bypassed security, and why leave a trace at the scene unless someone wanted them to find it? It felt staged, as if someone else was pulling strings from behind the scenes. Catching the known villain would still be important, but Reina suspected another party was involved. She hesitated, then shared her thoughts aloud, explaining that the ease of the case, the bypass security, and the left-behind trace suggested a setup and potentially a second party manipulating events. Iris groaned at the prospect of another villain being involved. Prowler sprang up and pounced across a building with cat-like agility, landing and sniffing the air. He reported that the scent of the villain was nearby and that he could identify the correct building where the suspect was hiding. They could not afford to stop now and let him escape. Edgeshot nodded and instructed Iris to accompany Silhouette. Reina told Prowler to come with her. She blinked in surprise and hesitated, but Iris reminded her that All Might had said she could not stay in her comfort zone forever, assured her that Iris would be with her, and urged her to trust her instincts. Reina inwardly complained that she had just taken on more work. Iris linked arms with Reina and asked her to explain exactly what she was thinking and what leads she had. Reina began from the beginning, describing the politician's house. The detectives at the scene had been surprised to see Hiro's return, but one of them recognized Reina immediately. The detective introduced himself as Tsukachi Naomasa and asked what had brought them there. Iris stepped forward and asked to check the scene, but Tsukachi explained that he could not allow that and offered to show them the crime scene analysis on his tablet instead. The report confirmed Reina's suspicions. Cash had not been taken, but several papers were missing, and the photograph of the body showed not blade marks but several unusual openings, not consistent with the work of a bladed assassin. Reina requested that Tsukachi zoom in on the photo. He complied. Satisfied for the moment, Reina said they would be leaving and pulled a confused Iris away. As they walked, Tsukachi asked if they had found anything new, and Reina replied that she would confirm first and then inform him. Iris asked what Reina had seen. Reina explained that the item of interest was a visiting card to an abandoned junkyard dated about 5 years earlier. Iris asked why that mattered. Reina pointed out that 5 years ago the man named on the card had still been in prison, so it was odd for him to have a visiting card for that yard. Reina reasoned that whoever had arranged the meeting wanted the intended visitor to find the card. Iris admitted she was confused. Reina sighed and wished for a momentary escape from the hassle. Iris then announced that they were going to the junkyard. The junkyard was an eerie cluster of rusting vehicles and tangled metal. A man in a dark cloak sat on top of one wrecked car, watching a frail, middle-aged civilian standing before him with trembling hands. The cloaked figure smiled without warmth and tossed the civilian a report, claiming that his actions would resolve 2 problems at once and that the assassin would be arrested. The civilian protested, distraught. Reina stepped out from behind the cloaked man, hands in the pockets of her costume and expression flat with disapproval. The civilian reacted with panic, insisting he had not meant for things to go that way. The cloaked man dismissed Reina as merely a trainee and suggested she was not much of a threat. A butterfly landed near Reina. The cloaked man moved first in a quick blur, his fist slamming into the hood of a rusted Jeep as Reina slipped aside with fluid precision. He attacked again, his strikes tearing through her shadow constructs as if swiping through smoke. Reina remained calm. She let her shadow unwind behind him and slide under a precarious pile of scrap car doors, pipes, and a heavy transmission block balanced on a bent beam. As he lunged, Reina shifted her weight with quiet control. Her shadow tugged at the support beam and it snapped. The scrap pile collapsed in a dramatic roar, metal clattering and sparks flying. The cloaked man was knocked off balance and ended up tangled in the fallen wreckage and suspended awkwardly from a bent light pole, immobilized by Reina's shadow without visible injury. Dust hung in the air like a slow cloud. Iris's butterfly constructs fluttered to keep the nearby civilian from fleeing. The civilian continued to plead that he had been trapped by events beyond his control and insisted the cloaked man was skilled. Iris recorded the civilian's confession on a device and prepared to hand it over to the authorities. Before they could act, the cloaked man freed himself from the wreckage, reached the civilian, and guided him away from Iris, positioning himself protectively between the civilian and the heroes. He told them that the world was not so neatly divided into heroes and villains. Iris clicked her tongue and asked what could be inferred from the man's behavior and motives, puzzled by his willingness to protect the civilian. The cloaked man scoffed that their simple assumptions would not grasp the truth. Reina shifted from side to side, mimicking a prowler's balance, and Iris transformed into a swarm of butterflies again to confuse him. The cloaked man declared that their tactics would not work on him, but Reina's quirk sent out several whip-like shadows that pounced on him. The civilian dashed toward an exit, but Iris pursued to ensure he could not run. Reina pulled on the shadow whips and slammed the cloaked man against a flickering headlight, then tied a shadow tether around a pole and used her foot to pin him down. He struggled to free himself, but Reina activated a stronger version of her quirk, concentrating light and shadow until the headlight flared and her shadows held him firmly in place. The cloaked man lifted his head and looked at Reina under the brighter light. He paused, his expression shifting into one of uneasy recognition. He offered a brief remark about whether answering would matter, and Reina pressed on, asking why he had protected the civilian. At that moment Iris approached with the documents that had been exchanged earlier and the man they had tied up. Iris indicated to Reina that the papers might explain everything. Reina scanned the documents and her eyes widened as she recognized the politician named in the files. The civilian with the receding hairline began to sob and, between choked breaths, claimed that the politician was responsible for what had happened to his daughter. The civilian explained that they had evidence, but he had hidden it. He said the court would have sentenced the man to death or at least life imprisonment if the truth had been known, but the man had kept it concealed. When he was released, it was as if a new hell had opened for them. He had sent goons after everyone who had opposed him in the trials. They were beaten, their homes looted, and living normally had become unbearable. The civilian pointed to the cloaked figure and said that this man had intervened without being asked, admitting that the stranger had gone too far but pleading for mercy. Reina sighed. The politician had committed heinous crimes, there was no doubt about that, and the villain the pro-heroes had been alerted to was the thug he had targeted at the families. In that light, the man in the cloak had been doing those people a real favor. Iris asked the crying man why they had not reported the crimes, and he replied that the politician had connections everywhere and their attempts had come to nothing. Reina took in the complexity of the situation. Her eyes met the red ones that had been watching her. This man was not a typical villain, but a vigilante. Still, he had killed someone, and his actions raised difficult questions about his quirk and methods. Reina told the old man that he would need to go to court and plead, explaining that the hero's duty had ended the moment they had apprehended the man. She then showed him the website of her father's law firm and offered help. The man, disbelieving, protested that Takahashi Akira was too expensive, but Reina assured him that Akira would take the case for a reduced fee and that she would arrange it. The man gasped in relief and sank to his knees, thanking her profusely. Reina paid little mind to the gratitude and focused instead on the man beneath her foot. She asked if he had heard of the League of Villains and quickly assessed from his expression that he was familiar with them. When the man named himself as Fong, Reina weighed her options. She gave him a choice: go to jail or become an informant for them. She leaned in, her expression firm, and presented the offer plainly. Returning to the hero agency felt awkward. Reina had called her father and informed him of his next client. He agreed to help without hesitation. In the dojo, Edgeshot, Prowler, Iris, and Reina met with Fong tied to a chair, his cloak discarded and pocket knives removed. Edgeshot rubbed his temples and asked if Reina intended to use the man as an informant. Reina affirmed her plan. Prowler voiced concern about trusting a villain, while Iris defended Fong, reminding everyone that he had helped people when the system had failed them. Reina thought about the complications and admitted that her gut was urging her to try. Edgeshot conceded that gut instincts were difficult to argue with. Prowler worried about the risk of Fong turning on them, and Reina noted that obtaining permission from the higher authorities would be a hassle, but she accepted that the potential intelligence about the League of Villains and their possible sponsorship made it worthwhile. Edgeshot reported that he had spoken with Nizu, who seemed eager to handle the legal aspects and would discuss the matter with Reina upon her return to school. Reina grimaced inwardly at the thought of her principal's eager involvement but remained resolute. Prowler questioned trusting Nizu's judgment so readily. Edgeshot explained that Fong would be held at UA until the principal returned, and a security team accompanied by professional heroes would take him into custody shortly. Fong, restrained and resigned, pointed at himself and reminded them that he was still present. Iris mocked his reminder, and Reina sighed, wondering what she had gotten herself into. As the security officers prepared to take Fong away, he looked at Reina seriously and warned her to stay alert about Hosu City that night. Edgeshot repeated the place name and noted that Hosu was where the hero killer had struck before. He wondered if Fong was referring to that. Reina could not say, but the warning set everyone on edge. Edgeshot called Endeavor about the warning. Despite some doubts about how Fong had obtained such information, Endeavor agreed to stand by in Hosu. Reina used a new method of transport to accompany the pro-heroes on the deployment. Endeavor instructed her not to engage in combat unless it was necessary to save someone. Reina complained inwardly about the restrictions but complied. A notification from Midoriya appeared on Reina's phone with only a location pin. She assumed it might have been sent by mistake but put the phone away and increased her pace to keep up with the pro. When they arrived in Hosu, the city was in chaos. Fires burned in places and strange, monstrous figures Nomus had appeared, some of them winged and more imposing than the ones Reina had seen before. She warned the pro-heroes nearby that those were Nomus and felt alarmed at their scale and menace. Edgeshot and other on-scene pro-heroes immediately moved to engage the creatures in coordinated, high-energy combat, focusing on protecting civilians and containing the threat without dwelling on injury details. Reina took out her phone again and saw Midoriya's recent message and a nearby pin. She sighed, thinking he was troublesome, then clenched her fists as her mentor's words came back to her. Sometimes heroes had to do difficult things to help others. Worried that Midoriya might be in danger, she sprinted toward the location. Stain lunged at Todoroki, aiming to worsen a small wound on the boy's face, but Todoroki pushed him back with his fire. As Stain moved, Todoroki shot ice at him, but Stain cut through the ice and landed, his face lit by the flames. Stain scoffed that tricks would not work on him, then suddenly went rigid as Reina took control of him with a precise immobilization. Todoroki and Ida's eyes widened. Midoriya called out to Takahashi and was able to move again. Reina crouched in the same stance as Stain, scolding Midoriya for sending only his location and warning him not to ease up with his fire or the villain would break free. Todoroki nodded and scanned the surroundings. Ida was on the ground injured, and another hero lay nearby. Stain sneered that they were children playing at heroes and claimed he could still act. He shot out his tongue to snatch a small blade from his shoulder and hurled it at the fallen hero. Reina reacted, releasing her trap and front-flipping to pull the pro away by his shoulder. In the maneuver, a blade struck her leg, causing a painful injury, but she steadied the pro against the wall. Midoriya warned Takahashi not to let the villain exploit her injury, since it could incapacitate her, and punched Stain to keep him back while she helped the fallen hero. Reina asked Ida if that explained his state. Ida looked away in shame and pleaded with her not to intervene, insisting this was his battle. Reina observed that he did not look battle-ready, then stood with the blade still embedded in her leg and told Midoriya that her trap would not hold Stain but that she could still use her whips. Midoriya agreed to distract the villain while the others supported him, and his body began to emit green electrical sparks. Stain noted the 3-against-1 odds and warned the fight would be difficult. Midoriya charged with impressive speed, catching Reina off guard. Reina realized he had learned to control his power and that this gave them an advantage. Midoriya leapt from wall to distract Stain while Todoroki used both aspects of his quirk and Reina launched her whips to trip or hurl the villain into the wall. Todoroki cursed that Stain was faster than before and that his ice could not keep up. When Stain struck Midoriya's ankle and forced him against the wall, Reina sent a whip to push the villain away and Todoroki followed with a wave of fire. Ida muttered that he had already suffered enough, his eyes filling with tears. Todoroki shouted at him to stand up and remember what he wanted to be. Reina retrieved fragments of ice and hurled them to distract Stain, managing to land hits, and Todoroki sent more fire that created a smokescreen, obscuring the villain's movements. Midoriya called out a warning about the right, but Stain slipped past Reina. The villain drew his blade as if to strike at Todoroki's arm. Ida leapt in and used Recipro Burst to intercept the blow, kicking Stain away. Midoriya breathed a sigh of relief that Ida had moved. Reina asked if the class rep was finally back on his feet, and Todoroki admitted he had overestimated the situation. The rescued hero apologized, saying the fight had nothing to do with the three of them and urged them to leave, but Ida interrupted and insisted he could not allow them to suffer further injury. Stain taunted that people could not change and called them frauds who prioritized themselves. Todoroki called him a fanatic and warned Ida not to listen. Ida, shaken, admitted he doubted himself but refused to give in because otherwise Ingenium would be lost. Todoroki pushed Ida to the side and used his flames to block another attack. The rescued hero shouted that Stain was targeting him and the armored hero and urged everyone to evacuate. Reina realized Stain was becoming more active. She felt a sharp pain when she moved and knew she had to keep the blade in to avoid worsening her condition and giving Stain an opening. Recognizing that Stain was desperate to reach Ida and the rescued hero, Reina used her whips to hook a pole and swing upward, kicking Stain as he approached. Stain twisted the blade still lodged in her leg in an attempt to worsen her injury, but he failed to remove it. She stifled a cry and flipped back behind Todoroki as he unleashed another wave of fire. Ida suddenly asked Todoroki to regulate his temperature. Todoroki admitted he was not fully comfortable using his left side yet, and Ida urged him to freeze his legs carefully while managing his technique. The three discussed the plan quickly as Reina took the role of primary fighter against Stain. Stain growled and threw a small blade toward the group. Ida stepped in front to shield them. Another knife struck his arm and forced him to the ground, leaving him in severe pain and unable to use that limb. Reina shouted and slammed Stain across the alley to create distance. Ida urged them to act quickly. Limping, Reina steadied herself and prepared her shadow-based attacks, exhausted and hoping they could finish this before she gave out. Stain charged, and Reina stepped back to prepare the same maneuver she had used at the end of the cavalry training when Ida activated his engine extension and Midoriya switched into full cowl. Midoriya and Ida appeared from nowhere and struck Stain with coordinated attacks. As soon as they were clear of the kill zone, Todoroki unleashed a blast of fire. Reina used her shadow to catch her falling classmates and help them to their feet. She warned that Stain might still be dangerous, then realized he was unconscious, his body dangling from an icy ledge. Todoroki sighed and suggested they restrain him and move him out to the street, asking if there was anything to tie him with. Reina started to volunteer her quirk, but her legs gave out and Todoroki caught her, noticing she was drained and that her power would not be enough to bind Stain. She muttered how inconvenient it was. Together they found a rope, bound Stain, and removed the weapons from his person. The hero known as Native carried Midoriya piggyback as they left the alley. Native apologized, saying that even as a professional he felt he'd just been in the way. Midoriya reassured him that nobody could have handled Stain alone, the villain's quirk was too dangerous. Reina pointed out that fighting 4-on-1, even with Stain making mistakes, they had barely won. He had likely been flustered, may have forgotten about Midoriya's recovery intervals, and had failed to counter Ida's last burst or Midoriya's movements. The sudden swings in temperature from Todoroki's ice and fire and the heavy blow Stain had taken probably shut him down. Once on the main street, Native urged they get Stain to the police as quickly as possible. A small, elderly man in a yellow cape across the way called out at them. Midoriya brightened at the sight, but the old man Gran Torino immediately scolded Midoriya for not staying seated on the train and shoved him with a foot. Native asked who the man was, and Reina explained that Gran Torino was the hero Midoriya was interning with. The old man fumed but admitted relief that none of them were dead. Midoriya bowed and apologized properly, still trembling from the encounter. More professional heroes arrived, some calling for ambulances and police. They were visibly stunned to find the hero killer bound behind a group of high school students. While medics examined the injured, Ida approached and bowed deeply, taking responsibility for what had happened and apologizing for letting his anger blind him. Midoriya admitted he had failed to notice his friend's distress despite their friendship, and Reina added that she had seen Ida struggling but had not acted. Ida flinched and tears fell, and Todoroki quietly urged him to pull himself together as the class representative, which allowed him to compose himself. The fragile moment ended when Gran Torino shouted for everyone to get down. Their heads snapped up as a large, monstrous figure, a Nomu, dove toward them and swept Midoriya into its grasp. Midoriya's classmates shouted in alarm. Reina attempted to activate her quirk but stumbled and realized she was completely drained. The hero killer moved past the chaos and charged after the Nomu. He engaged the creature and quickly neutralized it with brutal efficiency, then spoke about his warped belief that corrupt heroes and criminals needed to be purged for society to be just. The fact that he had chased and stopped the Nomu surprised them. Stain's actions were unpredictable and dangerous. Endeavor arrived moments later to assist. Reina could not take her eyes off Stain for 3 reasons. He had captured Midoriya, he was clearly unhinged, and he had captured Midoriya. He spat insults, calling them false heroes and claiming he would purge hypocrites and reclaim the meaning of heroism. He declared that there was only one person he would allow to kill him, a true hero, and invoked All Might as the standard. Stain radiated a chilling intensity that made Reina uneasy, especially with her friend so close to him. Then that intensity faded abruptly and Stain went rigid, falling into unconsciousness with his mouth open. Todoroki asked Reina if she had done something, and Endeavor approached cautiously and declared that Stain was out cold. Later, in the recovery area, Midoriya confessed he had not been able to sleep. Reina agreed that she had not slept either and insisted, with some exasperation, that anyone who wanted to sleep should be allowed to. She opened the privacy curtains around their bed, startling Midoriya into a flustered reaction at finding her in the same room as the boys. Reina commented that she did not understand the logistics of placing a girl in a room with 3 boys and told him to keep his volume down. Midoriya calmed and began speaking about the events. Reina noted she had only sustained a flesh wound to her thigh. The door slid open and Gran Torino entered with 2 other pro-heroes. One was the hero Manual, and the other was Edgeshot. Edgeshot glared at Reina and rebuked her for engaging in battle against XPLCT instructions, and Gran Torino interrupted to announce that they had a visitor. A man with dog-like quirk traits walked in and introduced himself as Tsurugami Kenji, the chief of police from Hosu. He told the students to remain seated and spoke in a firm, clipped manner, occasionally emitting an involuntary bark due to his quirk. Tsurugami confirmed that they were the UA students who had taken down the hero killer. He reported that Stain had suffered serious injuries, severe burns, and several broken bones and was currently being held in the hospital under strict guard. He then explained that when quirks became widespread, the police force had worked to maintain order without using quirks as weapons, which led to the licensing of heroes. Licensed heroes could operate in ways the police could not, but the police remained opposed to the use of deadly abilities. The chief reminded them that heroes existed to prevent harm and that the only reason pro-heroes could use their powers freely was the strict code of ethics set by the early heroes. He explained that it was against the law for uncertified people to use their quirks to cause injury. The chief then pointed at each of the 4 of them and warned that they and their supervisors Endeavor, Edgeshot, Manual, and Gran Torino faced harsh punishments for abusing their powers. Todoroki objected loudly, his temper flaring as he argued that if Ida had not intervened, Native would have been killed, and that without Midoriya several people would have died. He insisted that if Takahashi had not arrived, both Midoriya and himself would have been dead, and accused the chief of suggesting they should have stood by and watched people die. Midoriya tried to calm Todoroki down. Chief Tsurugami narrowed his eyes and asked if it was acceptable to break the law whenever one thought it justified. He reminded them that a hero's duty did not exempt them from legal consequences and criticized UA and Endeavor for not preparing them well enough. Reina intervened before the situation could escalate, placing a hand between Todoroki and the chief. She then cited Section 701, subsection 5, explaining that in emergencies where pro-heroes were not available, heroes in training were permitted to act to protect others. Her classmates were surprised that a high schooler knew this much about the law. She revealed that her father was a lawyer. Tsurugami replied that the law applied only to licensed students. Before Reina could respond, the chief blinked and acknowledged her father at the door, revealing that he had already consulted him about the incident. Gran Torino urged everyone to hold on and let the conversation continue. Tsurugami went on to state the police department's official position. Punishment would only be necessary if the incident became public. He suggested that if it stayed quiet, they could attribute the rescue to Endeavor and avoid legal trouble, though that would also mean losing any public recognition for their actions. He emphasized the choice was theirs. Reina's father supported the idea of keeping the matter from going on record so the students would not acquire legal actions on their records. Tsurugami added that he did not want to damage promising careers over a single mistake. Manual acknowledged that supervisors bore responsibility for negligence, prompting Ida to step forward and apologize. Midoriya also apologized to his mentor. Reina turned to Edgeshot and apologized for acting without permission and for causing trouble. Edgeshot sighed, ruffled her hair, and accepted some of the blame, admitting that he had told her not to engage unless it involved saving someone. Tsurugami conceded that they would miss out on fame and praise but offered, in his capacity as chief of police, a formal thanks. Todoroki grumbled that that should have been the chief's opening remark rather than a reprimand. The pro-heroes and police officials left soon after, and Reina's father remained as the only adult in the room. He clapped his hands together and introduced himself, saying it was a pity they had to meet under such circumstances. Midoriya gave a small bow, which made Reina's father laugh and tell him there was no need for formality. Reina asked her father why he had come. He explained that the chief had sought his advice on keeping the students out of legal trouble. He rubbed her head affectionately and called her troublesome for getting into a dangerous situation. Then he handed each of the four a vending machine strawberry milk, patted their heads, and told them to rest. Before leaving, he asked them to keep the matter between themselves, warning that Reina's mother would overreact otherwise. Reina nodded in agreement. A few hours later, Reina was discharged from care and went to find the three boys. She stopped when she noticed the tense atmosphere. Todoroki informed Takahashi that Ida's test results had returned, indicating possible long-term damage to his left hand. Reina thought for a moment and realized the injury had been more serious than she had first believed. Ida and Midoriya discussed their injuries and how they would get stronger from the experience, sharing a quiet, emotional moment that made Reina look away awkwardly and roll her eyes inwardly at the intensity. Her attention moved to her middle school friend, who suddenly looked troubled and admitted that he felt guilty. He confessed that whenever he was involved in an incident, someone's hand ended up injured, and he wondered aloud whether there was something wrong with him, even wondering if he might be cursed. Reina reacted with an exasperated expression while the others began to laugh at the absurdity of the thought, teasing him about his dramatic phrasing. Edge Shot granted Reina the next day off to rest, and she spent the fourth day of her internship recovering. Iris and Prowler, having learned the basic outline of what had happened, visited her dorm to check on her. Iris poked Reina's cheek and asked what the hero killer had been like. Iris asked if it had been super scary. Prowler sighed and said that of course it would have been scary for a child, and that it was a miracle Reina had come away relatively unharmed. Reina asked Iris to stop poking her and sighed as Iris ignored the request and kept prodding her cheek, small marks forming on her forehead. She found the annoyance rising in her. Prowler shifted and drew his tail out from beneath him, commenting that for someone who hated trouble, Reina seemed to get into it a lot. Reina replied flatly that it was not a choice. Prowler told her that from tomorrow onward they would return to normal daytime patrols and add combat training with him. That was how she spent the next 3 days of her internship. Even though Edge Shot had not expressed further dissatisfaction, Reina carried a steady guilt during the remaining time. When the internship finally ended, Edge Shot personally escorted her to the train station. Reina thought her time under him was over and worried he might retract his offer, yet a strange disappointment tugged at her. Edge Shot called her name and asked what her hero name meant and whose silhouette was to her. Reina blinked and explained that the name did not have a deep reason. She had chosen it because it fit her quirk. Edge Shot crossed his arms as her train arrived and told her that the next time she returned he wanted to hear the real reasoning and understand what kind of hero she wanted to become. Reina asked in surprise if there would be a next time. Behind his mask, he smiled and reminded her that he was not finished teaching her and that only a passionate hero would abandon common sense to help someone. He said she was not fully there yet, but he wanted to see her flourish, and that the Edge Shot agency would welcome her back. He encouraged her to keep her head up and trust her instincts. Reina stood stunned for a moment, a new glint in her eyes, then nodded and bowed and thanked him. At home, during dinner, Reina's mother kept glancing at her and smiled when Reina took a second helping of rice. Her mother, relieved, said she had been worried Reina might develop an unhealthy relationship with food and was glad to see an appetite. Reina's father explained that using her quirk burned a lot of energy lately, which made sense of the change. Reina wondered why her mother worried about such things. Her mother then fretted about the internship and asked if Reina had really encountered the hero killer in Shinjuku. She said it was fortunate that Endeavor had been there to assist and that Edge Shot had helped subdue the attacker, and she mused about sending a thank you basket. Reina's father dismissed the idea of thanking Endeavor and made a curt remark about him. Reina raised an eyebrow at her father's sudden edge and learned that Todoroki Enji had never gotten along with him. Reina noted the awkward family exchange and let it pass. Back at UA, The principal welcomed Reina and hoped the internship had been productive. Ectoplasm observed that bringing back a vigilante had made it more than fruitful. Reina stood in the teacher's conference room while all the faculty watched with serious expressions except the principal, who looked almost amused. Class B's homeroom teacher slammed his fist on the table and argued that they should not be considering cooperating with a vigilante and that the man should be jailed. Present Mike leaned back in his seat and remarked on the unusual idea of working with vigilantes. Aizawa insisted he had not taught her anything in particular and that the decision had been Reina's. Fong, the detained vigilante, sat in the corner in chains and said nothing. Aizawa explained that he wanted to use Fong as an informant for the school's benefit, noting that Fong had contacts with the League and had warned them about trouble in Hosu, which had helped coordinate rescues. Midnight considered the situation and pointed out that having Nomis and a hero killer at the same time would have been disastrous without the timely arrival of top heroes. The principal noted the clear advantages and that Takahashi and he had discussed the pros and cons over the phone and agreed the benefits outweighed the risks. Ectoplasm protested, acknowledging that while Feng's intentions might not be malicious, collaborating with a vigilante involved questionable methods. Aizawa countered that if a method saved lives, its morality could not be dismissed so simply. The homeroom teacher continued to object loudly, but Aizawa argued that Reina was intelligent and would not have taken unreasonable risks. The principal chimed in that Reina had confided things to him that made her a reliable choice, and he urged All Might to listen. All Might finally asked what Reina had to say. Reina hesitated, aware of what the principal expected. He wanted her to speak about the theory she had mentioned the first time he had called her in. If Ed's shot gave her room to talk, Nizu had pushed her until she answered. Their personalities were very different. She explained that the League of Villains was being sponsored by a tycoon villain and that someone much worse was working behind that man. All Might stiffened at the revelation and asked how sure she was. She replied that she was very sure and that it was the only explanation. The symbol of peace sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Nizu addressed her and said they would accept the offer, then asked if anyone remained unconvinced. The room stayed silent, which showed that even those with reservations among the pro-heroes were not opposed. Fong finally spoke up and presented two conditions if he had to act as a pawn. Aizawa reacted with a sharp retort about keeping him out of jail being sufficient, but Fong persisted. Nizu encouraged him to continue. Fong said first he needed money to live, and second that he wanted to relay his information through Reina. Aizawa refused the latter condition outright. Midnight questioned why he wanted to use a student, arguing that any of the pros could handle the information trade. Fong rolled his eyes and said his messages would be cryptic and difficult to decode. Nizu confirmed that he could decode them and proposed that Fong convey the information through either Nizu or Takahashi, whoever was easier to reach at the time. Aizawa objected, but Takahashi accepted the arrangement and said she would comply if it kept Fong cooperative. Fong leaned back, satisfied, and the agreement was made. Nizu smiled and told Takahashi to return to class because homeroom would begin. Takahashi acknowledged and left. She entered the classroom as Ida called for everyone to take their seats and urged them to work hard. She murmured that he seemed back to his normal self, which drew his attention. Ida expressed relief at seeing her okay, pushed his glasses up, and told her she was late. She deadpanned that it was a drag, and the class laughed. All Might later announced his presence to the class at another training ground and outlined the plan for hero basic training. He explained that they would run a rescue race inside the model city, each person starting at different locations, and that he would send out a distress signal for them to respond to. The first to find him would win, and he asked them to minimize property damage. Bokogu turned away, embarrassed at being singled out. The first group was called and the rest watched on a screen, trading guesses about who would win. Reina observed that now that they were not in immediate danger, Todoroki and Midoriya had redesigned their costumes. Todoroki confirmed that his new suit was fire-resistant. When the exercise began, Siro got off to a good start, but Midoriya surprised everyone with improved quirk control. Reina used her swingers and finished first in her group. Edge Shot's training had paid off. The exercise concluded smoothly, and the girls headed to the locker room to change and talk about it. Reina noticed Jair looking suddenly disgusted and asked what was wrong. Jairu indicated that she had discovered something concerning, and the girls found a small hole in the locker room wall. They agreed to deal with it promptly. Reina finished changing and left while planning to submit a written complaint. Later, Aizawa dismissed class, reminded them that only 1 week remained before final exams, and emphasized that the tests would include practical components in addition to written ones. He warned them to train both mind and body. Once he left, Kaminari and Ishido exclaimed that they had not studied. Kaminari panicked while Ishido laughed it off. Reina reflected that she had placed 20th out of 21 in midterms and that Kaminari had come in last. Midoriya encouraged the group to study so they could all attend the training camp together. Ida, in his role as class representative, urged everyone to act, proud of his third-place standing. Todoroki noted that paying attention in class made failure unlikely. Kaminari protested that Takahashi slept through class yet still placed first. Reina groaned and asked not to be dragged into the conversation. Uraraka reminded the room that Takahashi had exceptional intellect. Yaoyorozu offered to assist with lectures, delighting several classmates who sought her help. She volunteered to have her family open the hall for study sessions and asked about tea preferences, mentioning that her family favored Harrods or Wedgwood. Reina replied that she preferred Darjeeling Oolong, and Yaoyorozu complimented her taste. During lunch, Reina sat with her usual group while Ida and Midoriya discussed the practical exam. Uraraka, who had placed 14th, asked if they could manage the written portion. Azui, who had placed 7th, patted her back in reassurance. Midoriya started to elaborate on maintaining physical condition when someone accidentally bumped his head. Monoma from Class B had a tray that attracted Reina's attention because it contained something she found unexpected, which prompted her to blink in surprise. Ignoring her, Monoma continued to complain to his table about how Class A was always attracting trouble. Before he could elaborate, an orange-haired upperclasswoman, Kendo, appeared and smacked him. Kendo informed them that her upperclassman had said the practical exam would involve fighting robots again. Midoriya began muttering his doubts aloud, and Reina thought skeptically about the likelihood of that, imagining Yue's usual mind games. Reina lay on her back in ground Omega, staring at the bright blue sky and the clouds. A kitten had settled and was napping on her stomach. She had meant to practice her quirk after her mother had urged her to, but the kitten had chosen her, and she had no intention of disturbing the peace. Fong came up nearby and remarked that they had finally let him out. He thanked Reina and called her boss, teasing about whether she preferred to be called Sergeant instead. Reina sighed and declined the suggestion, petting the sleeping animal. Fong asked what she wanted from him, and she replied that it was anything related to the league and warned him that the group was shady. Fong sat cross-legged at a respectful distance in his cloak, which Reina thought looked like something out of an English PRD drama. Reina told him she was taking a risk trusting him but that vigilantes sometimes had more compassionate hearts than heroes. Fong paused, then promised that she would not regret the decision. A strong wind blew and woke the kitten, which scampered away. When Reina looked up again, Fong was already gone. The 3 days of the written test passed, and now Class A stood at UA's Central Plaza in their hero costumes, ready for the practical exam. Aizawa stood before them with the other teachers. When Jaira pointed something out, Reina began to suspect this was another one of Aizawa's mind games. Aizawa addressed the students, saying he expected many of them had gathered information and thought they knew what to expect. Kaminari and Ishido cheered enthusiastically at the prospect of fireworks and esmores, convinced they would face the familiar metal robots. Reina flinched when Aizawa's scarf rustled and Principal Nizu popped out of it, announcing that the exam would be different this time. Reina felt a cold panic rise as Nizu explained that the tests would now focus not only on hero work but also on teamwork and combat between actual people. Nizu cheerfully declared that the students would work in pairs and face opponents drawn from the UA faculty. Half the class reacted with surprise at the change, and Yaoyorozu asked, anxious, whether they were really altering the format. Aizawa clarified that partners and opponents had already been chosen by his discretion, considering factors like fighting style, grades, and interpersonal relationships. He announced the first pairing. Yaoyorozu and Todoroki would face him. Reina felt relief that she would not be opposing Aizawa. Nizu then revealed that Midoriya and Bakugo would form a team, and Reina cringed at the thought of pairing the two childhood rivals. Suddenly a large, blurred figure descended from above, shaking the ground. All Might appeared in his symbol of peace glory, announcing his presence and readiness to fight. Reina's worry intensified when Aizawa added that Takahashi would also be on the team facing All Might. Reina reacted sharply, incredulous that she would be teamed with Midoriya and Bakugo against All Might. She demanded to know why she had been placed on that team and suggested that Tokoyami would be a better partner, claiming he and she could devise several viable plans. Nizu smiled with the same amused expression he wore when Reina's intelligence was involved, and Tokoyami looked flattered when Reina pointed at him. Kaminari tried to ask how many plans she had that would work with him, and Reina dismissed him, causing him to sulk to the side. Other classmates reacted with a mix of disbelief and sympathy at Reina's outburst. Ojiro noted how unlike her this reaction was. Shiro offered sympathy, and Sato patted her back and offered chocolate. All Might, taken somewhat aback by the intensity of her outburst, told them that they would have to work together if they wanted to win. Reina fell to her knees, clutching her head and insisting that the arrangement seemed designed to set them up for failure. Inside, she was even more terrified that they might be put in mortal danger. Principal Nizu explained that to complete the exam they would have 30 minutes, and he produced a pair of strange-looking cuffs to demonstrate the constraints of the challenge, apparently indifferent to Reina's crisis. Present Mike announced that to win they had to put HNDCFFS on their teacher or have one member escape from the combat stage. Ashido asked if it was really acceptable to run away. Present Mike smugly warned that this exam would be very different from earlier training because they were up against people far better than them. Jairu tilted her head and asked whether he was really just an announcer, and Present Mike snapped at her to show respect. The teachers continued explaining the exam and noted that they would be wearing weights to give the students a fair chance. Reina Takahashi muttered to Aizawa that she had already taken that into account and that there were still no openings. Aizawa gave her a hard stare. Reina silently considered plans to escape with Tokoyami, but Aizawa told her she would have to devise new ones. Reina then asked whether they could give up mid-exam if they could neither fight nor run. Midoriya and the others reacted with surprise. Kirishima warned that quitting would mean being assigned to summer school. Ida stepped forward and urged everyone not to waste their effort and to give it their all. Aizawa's stare did not soften as he explained that, while quitting was theoretically possible, it would amount to failure. He added that if Reina gave up, her teammates would automatically fail and she would be expelled. Bakugo exploded in disbelief. Both of Reina's new teammates glanced between the teacher and her. Reina muttered that making her have no choice but to fight was troublesome. After the teachers finished announcing the remaining instructions and pairs and indicated students could watch the matches if they wished, Bakugo grabbed Reina's collar and pulled her closer. He told her he did not know what strategy she had in mind, but he intended to defeat All Might and pass the exam, and she should not ruin that by quitting. Ida intervened and reprimanded Bakugo, ordering him to let her go. The hot-headed blonde scoffed and walked away. Before heading to the monitor room, Reina approached Momo Yaoyorozu, who stood nervously in a corner biting her thumb. Reina asked if Momo was all right. Momo shut the topic down and said they did not talk about that. Reina advised her not to overthink things and reminded her that she was vice representative for a reason. Momo's eyes widened at the encouragement. Reina patted her shoulder and left for the monitor room. Midoriya and Uraraka were already there. Reina nodded to them, shoved her hands into her pockets, and asked where her teammate was. Uraraka admitted the teammate was busy. Midoriya then pulled out his notebook and, with a serious expression, asked Reina whether there was truly no way for them to confront All Might based on her analysis. Reina explained that it was not that a way did not exist. In fact, there were many options, but all required fleeing, which Bakugo would never accept. She said their team's disadvantage stemmed from cooperation rather than raw strength and confirmed that all three plans she had proposed with Tokoyami involved running away. Midoriya looked down, acknowledging that Bakugo would not run. On the main screen, Sato and Kirishima were fighting Cementos. Recovery Girl sat in front of the monitors. Reina remembered meeting her. Once during the sports festival, Recovery Girl greeted her and, recognizing her family name, mentioned that Reina's mother had been Banjo. Reina explained that Banjo was her mother's maiden name and that both her parents had been UA students in the general department. Recovery Girl recalled that Reina's mother had been student council president before the council was dissolved decades ago and described her as a cheery person. Reina inwardly agreed that her mother had been very cheerful. Sato and Kirishima were eliminated, and the next exam round began. Midoriya offered Reina his notes. After some hesitation and a flushed face, he handed over the notebook, admitting it was messy. Reina noted how perceptive he was and how thoroughly he had recorded everything. The detailed way he catalogued quirks suggested he might have plans that could outmaneuver most of the class. She flipped through his pages and then reached for a second, thicker notebook that Midoriya sheepishly produced, which was devoted entirely to All Might. Reina found his fangirl-level dedication amusing but also useful. The pages about All Might were exhaustive. With so much information, she felt she might be able to devise a plan to cuff the hero, but the notes portrayed him almost as a god, without obvious weaknesses. Reina took a spare notepad and began sketching plans and branches. She did not expect to succeed, but she did not want Midoriya to fail because of her. He crouched beside her and asked whether she had any workable plans. Reina admitted that most ideas were getting discarded either because of All Might's strength or Bakugo's temperament. She sighed and observed that Bakugo was strong but needed to control his anger. Midoriya looked down and appeared to be contemplating his friend's behavior. Uraraka suddenly brightened and announced that Ida and Ojiro had passed. Midoriya smiled and asked who was next. Uraraka said Momo and Todoroki were up. Reina stood and moved closer to the monitor, saying she wanted to watch because Momo had seemed off since returning from her internship. When asked what she meant, Reina explained that Momo no longer offered her opinions on training with confidence and had been hesitant about using her abilities. Reina noted that it was clear something had happened that had taken away the girl's confidence. Midoriya approached and agreed, asking if it might be because of her fight with Tokoyami during the sports festival. Reina held up 2 fingers and explained that the girl had become more complimentary toward both her and Todoroki because of comparisons. The girl was the second smartest in the class in planning, while Reina and Midoriyoki were the top students, and Todoroki was also a recommendation student. Reina added that Sensei had paired the girl with Todoroki for a reason. Reina said that if the girl had been teamed with her, they would have talked things out easily because they were friends, but with Todoroki it was different. He did not pick up on social cues and relied on his quirk too much. Reina said the matchup was meant to push the girl out of her shell and to encourage Todoroki to learn to communicate. They watched the exam. In the end, Yaoyorozu and Todoroki were able to restrain Aizawa. Ida and Yaoyorozu entered the monitoring room as soon as Uraraka's exam ended. Azui had joined them earlier, still curious about what Aoyama had said to make Uraraka so flustered. Ida congratulated Uraraka on passing, and the student representatives expressed their thanks. Reina praised Yaoyorozu for her well-thought-out plan, and Yaoyorozu beamed in gratitude. Reina told her there was a reason she had voted for her during the elections and urged her to have more confidence. Yaoyorozu was surprised and grateful for Reina's support. The students watched the next exam. Reina cringed and looked away when Nizu let out an unsettling laugh. Recovery Girl reminded them that Nizu had been subjected to human experiments in the past, and during intense moments he sometimes revealed a different side of himself. Kaminari and Ishido ultimately failed their exam. Uraraka returned and received congratulations. Azui, curious, asked Uraraka what she had been talking to Aoyama about during her fight with 13. Uraraka immediately grew very embarrassed, waving her hands and insisting it was nothing, denying any special meaning. Ida looked concerned, and Reina observed Uraraka's emotions shifting in an instant. Uraraka panicked and covered her mouth, adamant that the situation was not as it seemed. Yaoyorozu murmured that Takahashi had figured something out. Reina sighed and pulled Uraraka aside, telling her to calm down. Reina cast a quick glance at Midoriya before staying quiet. Jiru's and Hagikure's team passed their exam, but the next team's performance caused alarm. Mineta appeared overwhelmed and distressed, drawing worried looks from the others. Recovery Girl commented that it might be hard for a student like him to endure the demands of UA and continue progressing. When asked to clarify, Recovery Girl explained that UA continually presents challenges so students learn to overcome obstacles. To keep pushing forward, students need a concrete goal to focus on. She said the path to becoming a professional hero was not one that could be climbed on vague feelings alone, and that those whose only aim was to become a hero without a clear purpose might struggle to find a future. Reina listened and felt struck by Recovery Girl's words. She found herself questioning how she was still managing to move forward, uncertain whether she truly wanted to go pro. There was little time to dwell on it. Her own match against All Might was approaching. She left the monitoring room with Midoriya and met up with Bakugo at the designated spot. The proctor announced the start of the practical exam for Team Midoriya, Bakugo, and Takahashi. The three stepped into the cityscape they would be fighting in. Reina had already studied the blueprint in the monitor room and began planning escape routes. Midoriya tried to reason with Bakugo, warning that the villain was All Might and that fighting him would be dangerous and a bad idea. Bakugo sped up, ignoring him. Midoriya called after him to wait, but Bakugo shouted for him to stop following and walked past. Midoriya warned that if they kept going straight, All Might would probably be waiting for them and that they should take a detour. Bakugo insisted they should not run and argued they would be better off beating All Might up. Reina raised an eyebrow and reminded Bakugo that All Might was a pro among professionals. Midoriya expressed disbelief and urged that they avoid combat if possible. Bakugo boasted that they would toy with All Might until he was tired and then Bakugo would finish him. Reina stared, thinking his words were all bark and ego. Midoriya rushed toward Bakugo, desperate to make him understand how strong All Might was even with a handicap. Bakugo swung his arm and struck Midoriya with his gauntlet. Reina knelt beside Midoriya and called his name in concern. Bakugo told him not to speak and said that Midoriya's progress was angering him. Midoriya protested that this was why they could never have a calm conversation. Reina stepped in, glared at Bakugo, and accused him of risking the whole mission by refusing help, reminding him that Midoriya was trying to help. Without warning, a powerful gust of wind swept through, throwing debris and knocking them off their feet. Reina used her quirk to keep them from being blown away any further. A voice spoke through the dust, asking who cared about damaging the city, and All Might revealed himself. Reina felt a heavy sense of intimidation as he appeared. All Might stamped his foot and cleared the dust, warning them not to treat the exercise like an exam and declaring himself a villain, daring them to come at him with everything. Midoriya told Bakugo that they could not take All Might head-on and argued they should run. Bakugo charged at All Might, attempting a stun, but he was slammed into the ground. All Might moved straight for Midoriya with surprising speed, prompting Reina to note how fast he was. Midoriya prepared his own move, but Bakugo collided with him from behind and they crashed into each other. Reina used her shadow travel quirk to hide in All Might's shadow as a sneak attack, waiting for an opening while counting a limit of about 40 seconds she could remain hidden. When her time was up, Reina resurfaced from the shadow while All Might was distracted by Midoriya and Bakugo. She tried to place restraints on his wrist, but he grabbed her by the arm and pulled her free, discovering where she had been hiding. He propelled her toward a distant building. Reina attempted to soften the impact with her shadows, but the landing left her winded and gasping. All Might landed in front of her. Reina struggled to get to her feet, then tried to flee, but he aimed a punch at her midsection that sent her flying again. She hit a wall hard and felt dizzy. She retched and fought to steady herself. Reina thought to herself that All Might was far too strong. Crouching to recover, Reina sent a tendril of shadow at All Might. He stood with his hands on his hips and his trademark grin, which looked menacing in the moment. As her shadow was about to connect, All Might leaped up and remarked that she could not trap him without his own shadow, urging her to give up. Reina panicked and was sent tumbling into a dim alley where the lighting prevented her from using her two strongest attacks. She coughed and felt winded. Reina pushed herself up, moved along the walls, flipped over All Might's head, and landed beside him. She dodged a kick and landed behind him, repeating quick maneuvers until All Might flicked her on the forehead and she slumped at the end of the alley. Back in the monitoring room, her classmates watched nervously. Uraraka worried that All Might was giving Reina a difficult time. Their homeroom teacher, Aizawa, appeared in the room. Azui asked why Aizawa had come, and Aizawa said he had come to watch the match. Yaoyorozu asked Aizawa what had motivated him to place Takahashi on this team. Aizawa explained that the pairing was logical. Takahashi tended to give up too easily and had potential, but she often slacked off when effort was required. Ida agreed that Takahashi could be lazy. Aizawa added that pairing someone who gave up easily with people who would not give up was intentional, and he noted that she was not selfish enough to make others suffer because of her actions. Back on the field, Reina panted on the ground with her head downcast. All Might stood over her and asked if she was not going to come at him. Reina slowly raised her right hand. All Might wondered aloud whether she was giving up already, thinking that if she did both Midoriya and Bakugo would fail. Reina's hand hesitated, then she smirked. She let out a short, amused laugh and told All Might that he was a real drag to fight. Reina realized she had been cornered alone and pushed to give up. All Might shifted, his fist ready to strike. Reina admitted that she wanted to quit because everything felt too troublesome, but she refused to let her two teammates fail because of her perceived incompetence. Blood trickled from her nose as she stared up at him. She could not forget the look of absolute desperation on Bakugo's face earlier. Reina suspected he thought she had no more tricks, but she had prepared something grander. A shadow formed in her hand and materialized along the spots where she had moved, weaving around chunks of concrete and heading straight for him. As All Might swung to punch through the rubble, Reina bolted behind him, pulled a small grenade from her pocket, and detonated it. It was the same bright-style explosive Bakugo used, scaled down. That gave her the opening she needed to link his shadow to hers. She felt a surge of triumph as the trap took hold. All Might's eyes widened and his body stiffened. Reina dashed out of the alley so that his movement mirrored hers. Breathing became more difficult and she feared she might be injured, but she pressed on. They ran into a different lane and All Might, unable to follow the same path, plowed through a building in a dramatic burst of force. When he emerged, Reina leapt again to pull him off balance and taunted him to look where he was headed. He realized he was diving toward a river. With the extra weight he wore, he would sink. Reina held the shadow trap until the last second, then released it and used her whips to pull herself back onto the riverbank road. All Might crashed into the water and took several minutes to resurface. When he surfaced, Bakugo suddenly appeared in front of him and detonated a blast that forced All Might to retreat and land on the main road. Bakugo shouted for Midoriya as Reina's shadow dragged Bakugo back toward the road. Under the cover of some rubble, Midoriya appeared behind All Might wearing Bakugo's gauntlet. He aimed at the number 1 hero while Bakugo launched himself into the air to support the plan. Bakugo urged Midoriya to shoot, and Reina warned them to run, though she could no longer keep pace after pushing her quirk beyond its limit. Midoriya's power sparked to life. He scooped Reina into his arms and sprinted for the exit. Earlier, in the monitor room before the exam, Reina had called Midoriya over and spread out a blueprint of the exam area. She pointed to the river and outlined the plan. If she could lure All Might into the water, his weights would make him sink and they would need a strong follow-up attack. Reina intended to handle the follow-up, but they also needed Bakugo on board to make the plan work. Midoriya agreed and promised to bring Bakugo along. Now, as the exit gate came into view with Reina still in his arms, Midoriya murmured that they were almost there and that as long as one of them got through, they would pass. Reina kept watch over his shoulders for any sign of pursuit and found nothing at first. Bakugo scoffed at the idea that All Might had been knocked out, insisting the hero would come back and that it would be his turn to counter when he did. All Might reappeared suddenly and effortlessly destroyed Bakugo's gauntlet in a flash. He struck at Midoriya at the same time, tearing the gauntlet free and knocking Reina out of Midoriya's arms. She skidded across the ground and felt disoriented as the dust settled. All Might had the two boys immobilized, Bakugo pinned to the ground beneath his foot and Midoriya hanging from his arm. All Might looked down at Midoriya and asked what kind of expression that was, then flung the boy toward Reina, knocking her to her knees. Dizzy and struggling to orient herself, Reina saw Bakugo launch another fierce attack at All Might, the same explosive strike he had used in the sports festival. In the chaos, Bakugo grabbed Midoriya by the collar, declaring that he intended to send him flying because that was the only way to win with their current odds. Midoriya protested, and Bakugo's intensity flashed across his face as he prepared the blast. Knowing that doing nothing would mean disaster, Reina forced herself to move. She used her shadow travel to appear from Midoriya's shadow and propelled him toward the exit just in time, taking a heavy impact herself as All Might's counterstruck her instead. The blow left her unable to rise. A distant voice called out Reina's name, and she heard the thunderous cry of All Might smash through the air. Not long after, she felt strong arms lift her onto a shoulder. As she was carried away and the announcement came over the loudspeakers declaring that Team Midoriya, Bakugo, and Takahashi had passed, Reina allowed herself to lose consciousness. Reina came to as Recovery Girl gently kissed her forehead. She opened her eyes minutes later. Recovery Girl had already treated her head injuries, and now she was receiving care for her broken ribs. She had to take an entire box of energy tablets before the treatment could begin. Recovery Girl huffed and noted that All Might had been rough on them, then asked if Reina wanted to rest or go home. Reina said she was going home and that someone was coming to pick her up. Recovery Girl told her to be safe and invited her to visit again the next day. Reina limped toward the main gates after changing back into her uniform. On the way she crossed paths with Todoroki. He congratulated her on passing. He acknowledged her in return, remarked that her move had been smart, and offered to help carry her bag. Reina handed the bag over and hesitated when he extended his arm to offer support. Todoroki explained that he thought it might help because she was limping. She accepted his arm as he walked her toward the gate. Todoroki observed that her eyes seemed clearer, and Reina corrected him by saying she meant his perspective, referencing a remark she had made during the sports festival about his focus. He asked if that was a good thing, and she affirmed that it was. At the main gate a car waited with a chauffeur inside. Todoroki said he was headed elsewhere, opened the door for Reina, returned her bag, and left after a brief exchange. Reina got into the car and leaned back, nearly falling asleep. The driver teased that the boy had been cute, which made Reina groan. The teachers gathered in the lounge to discuss the exam results and notable performances. Aizawa approached All Might with a notepad he had found in the monitoring room, pointing out Takahashi's handwriting and the plans she had drafted for taking All Might on. All Might flipped through the pages and paused at a note describing a weakness near his abdomen, a momentary weakening that would be marked by him starting to smoke. Aizawa warned All Might to be careful not to push past his limits in front of the girl, since she was clearly perceptive. Later, Ishido sniffled with red-rimmed eyes and said she was looking forward to hearing everyone's camp stories. The 4 students who had failed the practical exam were feeling down, and Midoriya tried to console them. Kaminari complained that failing the practical meant missing out on training camp and joked that All Might had knocked the brains out of Midoriya. Reina muttered bitterly about how rough the experience had been, and Yaoyorozu patted her back in comfort. Aizawa entered the classroom and told the students that, despite some failures in the practical portion, no one had failed the written exam and everyone would be attending the training camp in the woods. He explained that for the practical battles the teachers had ensured a way for the students to win in order to observe how they work together, and that the extra lessons would be tougher for those who had failed. He listed the students who had failed the practical: Kirishima, Kaminari, Ishido, Sato, and Shiro. Ida protested that this was the second time Aizawa had lied to them and worried about losing faith in him. Aizawa acknowledged the point and said he would consider it while reiterating that failure would lead to additional, more demanding lessons. The announcement lifted some spirits, and the class began planning. Ida read the training camp booklet and remarked that they would need to bring many things. Hagakure suggested that since they had the day off, Class A should go shopping together, and several students agreed enthusiastically. Kirishima called to Bakugo to see him there, but Bakugo dismissed the idea. Midoriya invited Todoroki, who declined, saying he would be visiting his mother. Jiro asked Reina, referred to by her surname Takahashi, to come along, but Reina declined, saying she had to attend a dinner with her mother. Uraraka, surprised, asked whether Reina was wealthy like Yaoyorozu. Midoriya reacted to Uraraka's bluntness, and Reina admitted that she was not on the same level as Yaoyorozu but that her circumstances were comfortable. Yaoyorozu crossed her arms and asked if the others had not known. Reina explained that her mother was the CEO and founder of Zenlux Designs. Uraraka said it made sense because her own mother had worked with Reina's family a few times. Uraraka's eyes widened at the mention of CEO, and Kirishima, speaking from behind, said Reina must be very rich. Reina groaned and told them not to. They moved on from talking about her to discussing their shopping plans. Finally home from an exhausting dinner party, Reina kicked off her heels and headed to her room. Her father carried her mother into the house because she had fallen asleep in the car. The business conversation at the party had clearly worn everyone out. Reina and her mother had been the center of attention because of Reina getting into UA and her sports festival performance. Some guests tried to invest early, but her mother handled those offers. She flopped onto her bed for a moment and then went to the bathroom to shower and change into pajamas. When she returned, she stopped at the sight of Feng sitting in her chair. She wondered how he had bypassed the house security and guards with sensing quirks, since he had managed to do it once before. Feng told her that being cryptic was reserved for times when he could not come in person. He casually explained that her classmate Midoriya, the green-haired student, had encountered the crusty leader Shigaraki at the mall that day. Feng leaned back in the chair, his relaxed manner a stark contrast to the first time she had met him. Reina's eyes widened at the news that Shigaraki had been there. Feng elaborated that Shigaraki had been asking about what made him and the hero killer different and was upset that Stain had received more attention than him. Reina sat on her bed and asked if Midoriya had been hurt. Feng said Midoriya had not been hurt, but the police had shut down the mall. Feng had gone to look for traces of Shigaraki, but a misty figure appeared to have transported him away. The mall would be closed for a few days. Reina thought that Principal Nizu must already know about the incident. Feng stood, opened the balcony door, and warned that because the media had implied Stain was part of the League, some like-minded villains had joined the cause. He admitted he did not know who or how many, but he would try to find out. He smirked, promised to report back, made a dramatic bow, and vanished. Reina closed the balcony door, took out her phone, and messaged Midoriya to check on him. Midoriya replied that he had heard what happened and was okay, just a bit shaken. He confirmed he had left the police station with his mother and was going home. He reminded her about the first semester closing ceremony the next day and told her to rest. Reina promised she would and thanked him for the update. She sighed, put her phone away, and flopped back onto the bed, annoyed that the chaos had occurred while she was not there. The next day was the last day of school before summer break. The Class 1A girls gathered around Yaoyorozu and Reina's desks to discuss summer plans. Uraraka reacted with surprise to the news that they had to refrain from taking long trips over the summer. Yaoyorozu said she had been planning a trip to Venice with her parents and frowned at having to change plans. Reina deadpanned that summer in Venice would be humid and suggested Switzerland instead. Uraraka teased that Switzerland sounded bourgeois. Jairu said it could not be helped since they had previously been attacked by the League of Villains. Reina muttered that summer camp was coming up soon. Ashido complained loudly that she still wanted to play and go somewhere. Hagakure suggested meeting at the school pool during vacation, and the girls approved. Yaoyorozu rose to get permission from the teachers. Reina resigned herself to the idea that she would probably be forced to join them. On the arranged day, the girls arrived at the school pool in swimsuits regulated by Yaoyorozu called for a warm-up before they began. A loud bang at the entrance turned everyone's heads as a group of excited boys charged into the area. Ida greeted the girls and explained that the boys would be doing endurance training. Reina watched the boys and noted the cartoonish appearance of Ida in a yellow swim cap and goggles. Ignoring the boys' training, the girls began to play and relax, and Reina admitted to herself that it was pleasant. After some time, Ida brought orange juice from a cooler for everyone. A race was suggested, and Uraraka pulled Reina out of the pool to help the boys. Reina stayed on the sidelines and sipped juice as the boys lined up and started racing. Bakugo used his quirk to propel himself ahead, Todoroki froze parts of the water as expected, and Midoriya and Ida were competitive before the freckled boy won the preliminary round. The finals were set between Midoriya, Todoroki, and Bakugo. As the three jumped for the final race, They suddenly fell into the water when Aizawa entered with his hair floating and his quirk activated. He announced that pool time had ended and that everyone should go home. Reina hurried to the locker rooms to gather her things and left with Jairu and Yaoyorozu through the gates. Jairu grumbled that Aizawa was scary when he used his quirk because they had been getting to the exciting part. Yaoyorozu laughed as the friends exchanged a few light-hearted remarks on the way out. Jairu suggested that, since it was still early, the three of them go for ice cream. She pulled out her phone and said she knew a place not far away, then led them to a cafe. They sat inside and the air conditioning made them sigh with relief. The cafe felt cozy, with comfortable chairs and a homey atmosphere. After they ordered, they continued to chat. Jairu noted they had about a week before training camp and, twirling her earphone cords between her fingers, asked what the others planned to do until then. Reina answered that she would probably sleep. Yaoyorozu said she planned to study materials and elements so she could create more versatile things with her quirk. When the waitress set down their order, Reina asked Jairu what she planned to do. Jairu blushed and looked away, explaining that her parents were musicians, so she would likely spend time in the studio with them. Yaoyorozu tilted her head and mentioned that she was musically trained as well and had studied piano. Reina observed that this explained why Jairu sang so well. Jairu reacted with flustered surprise and protested that she was not that good. Yaoyorozu admitted they had often heard her humming in the locker room. Jairu protested again. Yaoyorozu insisted she was good, and Reina sighed. After finishing their ice cream and a few desserts, the waitress brought the bill. As Jairu reached for her wallet, Reina intercepted her hand and slid a card to the waitress, causing Jairu to yelp. Jairu asked why Reina had done that and said she had not even seen the bill. Reina replied that she would take care of it. Jairu grumbled and looked away, which made Yaoyorozu laugh at the sight of her friends.